وصول صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة. وصول صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة. السلام الملكي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي جعل النوم راحة للأنفس وسكنا للأبدان ونعمة تستوجب الشكر والتأمل، والصلاة والسلام على معلم البشرية نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، الذي أرشدنا إلى التوازن في حياة الإنسان بين العمل والراحة، بين الجسد والروح. صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة، سعادة الأستاذ الدكتور عبيد بن علي آل مضف رئيس جامعة جدة، أيها الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. يطيب لنا في هذا اليوم المبارك أن نرحب بكم أجمل ترحيب في رحاب جامعة جدة في افتتاح المؤتمر الدولي لعلوم النوم، التأثيرات النفسية والإدراكية، تحت رعاية كريمة من صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير خالد الفيصل، مستشار خادم الحرمين الشريفين، أمير منطقة مكة المكرمة حفظه الله. ونيابة عن سموه الكريم شرف الحفل بحضوره صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة رعاه الله، دعما للعلم والعلماء وتشجيعا للبحث والمعرفة في كل ما يعزز صحة الإنسان وجودة حياته. نبدأ هذا المؤتمر بآيات من الذكر الحكيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
ألم تر إلى ربك كيف مد الظل ولو شاء لجعله ساكنا ثم جعلنا الشمس عليه دليلا ثم قبضناه إلينا قبضا يسيرا وهو الذي جعل لكم الليل لباسا والنوم سباتا وجعل النهار نشورا.
أيها الحفل الكريم، كلمة ترحيبية بضيوف المؤتمر وعن أهدافه ورسالته العلمية والمجتمعية تتفضل بإلقائها سعادة الدكتورة رانيا بنت يوسف سليم، عميدة كلية العلوم الاجتماعية والإعلام ورئيس اللجنة التنظيمية للمؤتمر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة حفظه الله، أصحاب السمو والمعالي، الضيوف الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نرحب بكم اليوم في جامعة جدة، الجامعة السعودية الحديثة، والتي تنطلق منها أعمال المؤتمر الدولي لعلوم النوم، التأثيرات النفسية والإدراكية، برعاية كريمة من صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير خالد الفيصل، مستشار خادم الحرمين الشريفين، أمير منطقة مكة المكرمة حفظه الله، وبالنيابة وحضور وتشريف صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة حفظه الله. ينطلق هذا المؤتمر من إحدى الركائز الجوهرية لرؤية المملكة العربية السعودية 2030، وهي ركيزة مجتمع حيوي، والتي تسعى إلى توفير نمط حياة صحي مستدام ورعاية صحية واجتماعية فعالة، كما يساهم في تحقيق أحد مستهدفات برامج الرؤية، وهو برنامج تحول القطاع الصحي الذي يهتم بالصحة العامة والتركيز على الوقاية قبل العلاج، وتوسيع مفهوم الرعاية الصحية ليشمل جودة الحياة بمختلف جوانبها. ولذلك سعى هذا المؤتمر إلى تسليط الضوء على أهمية النوم وتأثيره العميق على الصحة النفسية والإدراكية، إذ أن معالجة اضطرابات النوم تعد أحد العوامل الأساسية في تعزيز الصحة العامة وجودة الحياة، وتسهم بشكل مباشر في تحسين القدرات البدنية والذهنية للأفراد، مما ينعكس إيجاباً على مستوى الكفاءة التشغيلية والأداء الوظيفي، ويدعم استدامة العمل المؤسسي، ويسهم في تعزيز الاقتصاد الوطني. وهذا ما يركز عليه مؤتمر علوم اليوم النوم، من خلال استعراض أحدث الأبحاث والدراسات العلمية في هذا المجال، وبمشاركة نخبة من العلماء والخبراء الدوليين والمحليين لتبادل الخبرات والتجارب وإثراء مخرجاته. يطرح المؤتمر 10 محاور رئيسة ضمن جلساته العلمية وورش العمل، إضافة إلى المعرض المصاحب الذي يثري تجربة الحضور ويوسع آفاق المعرفة. أيها الحضور الكريم، لا يسعنا في هذا المقام إلا أن نرفع أسمى آيات الشكر والتقدير والامتنان إلى صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير خالد الفيصل، مستشار خادم الحرمين الشريفين، أمير منطقة مكة المكرمة، على رعايته الكريمة للمؤتمر، وإلى صاحب السمو الأمير سعود بن عبد الله بن جلوي محافظ جدة على تشريف الحفل. كما نتقدم بجزيل الشكر إلى سعادة رئيس جامعة جدة الأستاذ الدكتور عبيد المظف على دعمه المتواصل لمشاريع الجامعة ومخرجاتها، والشكر موصول لسعادة وكيلة الجامعة لدراسات العليا والبحث العلمي الدكتورة شذب طه خصيفان. كما أشكر جميع المشاركين والمنظمين الذي أسهموا بجهودهم في إخراج هذا الحدث العلمي. نسأل الله أن يكلل أعمال هذا المؤتمر بالتوفيق والنجاح، وأن يحقق أهدافه العلمية والمجتمعية نبيلا. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise is due to Allah, and peace and blessing be upon our Prophet Muhammad. Your Highnesses Prince Saud bin Abdullah bin Jloui, Governor of Jeddah, may Allah bless you. Your Highnesses, Excellencies and special guests. It's a great honor to welcome you to the University of Jeddah, the International Conference on Sleep Sciences, Psychological and Cognitive Effects. This conference is held under the generous sponsorship of His Royal Highness Prince Khalid Al Faisal, advisor to the custodian of the 2 holy mosques and governor of the Mecca region, with the honor and presence of His Highness Princess Saud bin Abdullah bin Jloui. May Allah bless them both. This conference reflects one of the key pillars of the Kingdom's Vision 2030, the pillar of a vibrant society, which seeks to promote a healthy and sustainable lifestyle and strengthen healthcare system. It also supports health sector transformation program, highlighting prevention before treatment and enhancing all over quality of life. This gathering highlights the importance of sleep and its impact on psychological and cognitive health. Addressing sleep disorders is essential for improving well-being, boosting performance, and contributing of national development and economic sustainability. We extend our deepest gratitude to this Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Faisal, his sponsorship, and to His Highness Prince Saud bin Abdullah bin Jloui for honoring this event with this presence. Our thanks is also to His Excellency Professor Dr. Abeid Al-Madaf, President of the University of Jeddah, and to Her Excellency Dr. Shada bin Taha Khsefan for their leadership and support. May Allah bless this conference and grant it success in achieving its noble goals. Thank you for listening.
أيها الحفل الكريم، مشاهد علمية ومعرفية تجسد رسالة المؤتمر وأبعاده الإنسانية والعملية من خلال عرض مرئي بعنوان النوم والصحة، نتابع فيه لمحات من جهود جامعة جدة في تعزيز الوعي بأهمية النوم وجودته في حياة الإنسان.
في كل دقيقة يخلد ملايين البشر إلى النوم. النوم ليس مجرد راحة، إنه سر العقل ومفتاح النفس وضرورة حيوية لصحة الجسم والعقل. في عمق النوم تنشط الذاكرة وتعالج المشاعر وتتشكل الأفكار. لكن ماذا لو اختل النوم؟ القلق، الاكتئاب، ضعف الانتباه، تراجع الإدراك، مشاكل عصبية ونفسية وجسدية. لهذا يجتمع الباحثون والخبراء من حول العالم لفهم أعقد ظاهرة بيولوجية نعيشها يومياً، النوم. ولهذا تقيم جامعة جدة المؤتمر الدولي علوم النوم، التأثيرات النفسية والإدراكية، وهو حدث هام يركز على الدور الأساسي للنوم في دعم الصحة، ويهدف إلى تقديم فهم شامل لتأثير اضطرابات النوم على الجوانب النفسية والإدراكية، وأهمية التشخيص الدقيق لهذه الاضطرابات لتحقيق جودة حياة أفضل. تشير الدراسات العالمية إلى ضعف التركيز على تشخيص اضطرابات النوم في الممارسة العيادية، على الرغم من تأثيرها العميق في ظهور الأعراض النفسية والصحية التي تحد من أداء الأفراد وتعيق مسار العلاج. يأتي هذا المؤتمر لتعزيز الوعي والفهم العميق لمشكلات النوم وتأثيراتها النفسية والإدراكية. استجابة للحاجة المتزايدة لهذا الوعي، يتماشى هذا المؤتمر مع رؤية المملكة 2030 التي تهدف إلى تحسين جودة الحياة وتعزيز الصحة النفسية للمجتمع، حيث يسهم في دعم الجهود الرامية إلى توعية المجتمع وتطوير الرعاية الصحية، بما يتماشى مع أهداف الرؤية التي تركز على بناء مجتمع صحي وآمن. تعزيز البحث العلمي والابتكار في المجالات الطبية. النوم هو القوة الصامتة خلف كل إنجاز عظيم.
عرفانا وتقديرا لدعمهم وجهودهم، نكرم الرعاة والمشاركين الذين ساهموا في إنجاز هذا المؤتمر وإنجاحه، فبهم يزدهر العطاء وبتعاونهم تتحقق رؤية الجامعة. نستأذن سموكم الكريم بالتفضل للمسرح للتكريم، كما نستأذن سعادة رئيس الجامعة للتفضل للمسرح للتكريم. يتفضل الآن الرعاة والشركاء والذين قدموا خدمات للمؤتمر. سعادة الأستاذ إبراهيم خليل الحازمي الرئيس التنفيذي لمركز وعد للصحة والرفاه. سعادة الأستاذ علي بن محمد آل سعد المالك لشركة إيجليتي هيلث كير. سعادة المهندس أنس صالح صيرفي المالك لمتحف دار الفنون الإسلامية. ثانياً المتحدثون الدوليون. سعادة الأستاذ الدكتور جيريد كينيدي، سعادة الأستاذ الدكتور ديغ مارا، سعادة الدكتور راسيل كونديت، وسعادة الأستاذ الدكتور ستيفن ريتشارد، وسعادة الدكتور ماثيو جوناثان. كما نكرم الشركاء والمشاركون في هذا المؤتمر الجمعية السعودية لطب النوم، والجمعية الآسيوية لطب النوم، ومجلس الضمان الصحي السعودي. يتسلمها نيابة عنهم جميعا سعادة الدكتور وائل نبيل يار. شكرا لكم صاحب السمو على كريم حضوركم وتشريفكم لهذا المؤتمر. أيها الحضور الكريم، تفتتح الجلسة الأولى من المؤتمر لتكون منبرا للحوار العلمي الرصين، حيث تطرح الأبحاث والدراسات الحديثة حول العلاقة بين النوم والصحة النفسية والإدراكية في إطار علمي يسهم في إثراء المعرفة وجودة الحياة. تتفضل الدكتورة ربى آشي لتقديم الجلسات.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, it is with great honor that we open the International Sleep Science Conference, Psychological and Cognitive Impacts, held under the patronage of His Royal Highness Prince Khalid Al Faisal bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, advisor to the custodian of the two holy mosques and governor of the Mecca region. We are also honored by the presence of His Highness Prince Saud bin Abdullah bin Jloui, advisor to the governor of the Mecca region and governor of Jeddah. His Excellency, President of the University of Jeddah, Professor Ubaid bin Ali Al-Madaf, Vice Presidents, Deans, Excellencies, faculty members, keynote speakers, distinguished guests, and participants of the International Conference on Sleep Science. Today, we gather at the University of Jeddah to launch this important scientific event, which aims to raise awareness about sleep disorders and their psychological and cognitive impacts, not only among individuals, but also among healthcare practitioners and institutions. Through this conference, we aspire to promote better understanding, early detection, and effective management of sleep disorders, contributing to healthier and more productive communities. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. Without any delay, let us begin our first panel discussion titled The Role of Institutions in Addressing Sleep Disorders, Strategies for Prevention and Intervention. This session will be chaired by Dr. Yusuf Al-Qurashi, Assistant Professor of Respiratory and Sleep Medicine and Vice Dean of Academic Affairs in the College of Applied Medical Sciences at Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal University, Saudi Arabia. Please welcome Dr. Al-Qurashi and our distinguished panelists. Dr. Ahmed Bahammam, President of the Asian Sleep Medicine Society and board member of the Saudi Sleep Medicine Society. Dr. Wa'il Yar, Acting Executive Director of Sector Enablement of the Council of Health Insurance of Saudi Arabia. Professor Dagmara Dimitriou, Professor of Sleep Education and Research at University College London and Honorary Professor at Imperial College NHS, Healthcare, United Kingdom. Dr. Russell Conduit, Associate Professor in the Department of Health and Biomedical Sciences, Engineering and Health at RMIT University, Australia. And Dr. Matthew Reeves, Associate Professor in the School of Health, Social Work and Sport at the University of Central Lincolnshire, United Kingdom. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأصلي وأسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سعادة رئيس الجامعة، سعادة وكيل الجامعة، الحضور الكرام، أهلا وسهلا بكم في هذا السيشن. سنتحدث فيه إن شاء الله وتكون الأسئلة باللغة الإنجليزية والأجوبة كذلك باللغة الإنجليزية. سنعطي لكل محاضر دقيقتين أو 3 دقائق لكل سؤال. We'll give you 2 to 3 minutes to answer each questions. في البداية اسمحوا لي الحقيقة أن نتقدم بشكر جزيل لجامعة جدة على إقامة هذا المؤتمر الرائع جدا من ناحية المتحدثين والمواضيع المطروحة فيه، ويمكن القول الحقيقة بكل ثقة أنه قد يكون هذا من أول مؤتمر يقام للنظر في النوم من هذا البعد، التأثيرات النفسية والسلوكية. فشكرا جامعة جدة على إقامة هذا المؤتمر ودعوة الجميع لهذا اللقاء. أرحب الحقيقة بالحضور. Welcome everyone. I will start with Prof. Bahammam from Riyadh. Prof. Bahammam, welcome. We have a question. You as President of Asian Sleep Medicine Society, and I think you have a unique perspective here in the conference, because you have international conference, you have speakers from different parts of the country. So what do we know about the prevalence and burden of sleep disorders across Asia, and how this compare to the global figures? The mic is yours, Prof. Bahammam.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. هل صوتي واضح؟ نعم.
واضح.
نعم. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here. I wanted to do you physically, but unfortunately, Asia is a big continent. So when we talk about Asia, we have to remember that we talk about countries from Japan with different ethnicity and racial and cultural things like Japan, Korea, China, going through India and Pakistan, then coming to Saudi Arabia and West Asia. So when we talk about the prevalence of sleep disorder and impact, it spans through these countries with different cultures, educational and clinical practice standards. But in general, most of the work comes from Far East Asia. Saudi Arabia is also active in research to assess the prevalence of and impact of sleep problems. If we talk about Far East Asia, when we talk about, for example, sleep apnea, it's almost as common as that in the West, but they are not obese like Western patients because of the maxillofacial structure they have. Insomnia is more prevalent in Far East Asia than reported in the West, while narcolepsy is almost the same and recessive syndrome is lower. When we come to West Asia, we have almost similar numbers to that in Caucasian and Western countries. But we know from our gap analysis of Asia that most of the patients are undiagnosed and untreated as well. Now, this is talking about countries that have research and advanced sleep medicine service. If we talk about countries that they do not have sleep medicine as a service, the service does not exist, then the situation will be much worse, but we don't have data on that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Prof. Bahammam. I will move here to Dr. Wael Yar. Dr. Wael, you are the medical director of CHI, and I think you have a huge perspective on the private sector. So now the sleep medicine relatively new to the health insurance, and until lately the CPAP has been covered by insurance companies. Now if we want to talk about the CBTI, not only CBTI, but all of the non-pharmacological treatment for sleep disorder. How this covered by the insurance, and what are the efforts you are doing behind the scene?
Okay, thanks for the question. So let me go back one step behind. Today we have around 14 million beneficiaries in Saudi Arabia who is covered by the private health insurance. Sleep, in general, sleep medicine is covered completely by the essential benefit package from the Council of Health Insurance, which means anyone who has an insurance in Saudi Arabia from an employer mandated insurance, he will have all the sleep medicine services covered. That include consultation, treatment, medical devices, medication. They are not excluded. However, there is a challenges with making an agreement between the insurance companies and the providers. And if there is no agreement on certain services, that type of treatment might not be covered or might not be available. So not because the service is not covered, but there is no agreement between the providers about this treatment and the insurance company. And here, when you say new to the insurance company, yes, you're right. Sometimes we might have new diagnoses or diagnostic device in the market, and we have new treatment in the market, and the provider did not reach out to the payer to make an agreement to cover this type of medication or type of device. But in general, all the sleep services are covered. We have millions of riyals are being spent on CPAP machines by a lot of payers with different types. Going back to the CBT or CBTI, in general, since October 2022, now it has been exactly 3 years this year, all the cognitive treatment, including cognitive treatment for depression, anxiety, all of them are covered, including sleep. But again, the challenge comes with making an agreement between payers and provider. If the provider is not making enough money of these type of services, they might have a challenge. They are not incentivized to provide these services to their beneficiary, and also at the same time, payers will not pay that much amount for a session that can last for an hour. So it's covered, but there is a challenges in the middle. We need to tackle down in order to increase the coverage. We should acknowledge that all the CPAP, if they are indicated, they are covered. BiPAP machines are covered with different brands, and it's widely available in Saudi Arabia.
Excellent. I think we have a representative from industry as well. I think this is give them a chance to making an effort to cover all of these, and I think this is a very good platform to encourage the industry to cover such kind of treatment, because as you know, CBTI is the first line treatment for insomnia and should be covered. I will move the gear to Prof. Dimitroi. You have a huge research on how translate sleep from research to a policy, okay? And I think we have some of the policy maker in this room, and I want to ask you about the schools, and if you are to build a 3-year roadmap to translate sleep research into national school policy. What are the first critical steps you would take?
Okay, thank you. I don't think it works. Thank you for this question, which is quite complicated, but I try to be as fast as possible. So about 10 years ago, one of my doctorate students was Mia Binaid from Riyadh. She did her PhD in Saudi Arabia and did all the field work. So I think that could be based as a platform to continue understanding about sleep in childhood population, in school age population. And in comparison at the moment to Western countries, Saudi children don't sleep as long. And part of that is based on culture, because children go to school very early here. So obviously a lot of things need to be built upon the cultural differences, and also around Ramadan periods as well, where I'm going to talk about tomorrow. But in terms of schools, it's building studies national studies understanding children's sleep across development, also about napping. Do Saudi children nap? Because we know children in China do. And at the same time, also building into school curriculum, understanding knowledge about sleep, the importance of sleep, because at the moment it's still very much based on certain very narrow understanding, but that's not in Saudi specific, it's across the globe, but we need to make sure that we are teaching teachers, parents and children about sleep, and also bring that to policies at national level. That would be really important.
Great question. Great answer as well. One of the, I think the policy making they are currently doing, they are working with the World Bank currently to develop such kind of methodology to make it as a policy. I think with the regulatory body here in Saudi Arabia. So I think what you have stated, they are in the process and it will be conducted at some point.
Great. I just hope it's built into factors that it's a country which is different to other countries, but not based on Western countries' understandings.
Definitely.
Thank you.
So now let's go, Russell, about the shift work. Okay, you are expert in shift work, and you know this industry. There are lots of industry in our country, especially the oil industry, healthcare. They are all doing shift works. So now the question is, if we are going to implement a national regulations to reduce shift-related sleep harms, okay, which single policy would you prioritize for the fastest measurable impact and why?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. I think our first panel member mentioned the incidence of sleep disorders. The reality is there is a very large proportion of undiagnosed sleep disorders in the population. Estimates range from anywhere to 20 to 30% of people could be carrying a sleep disorder. If you look around the room, 1 in 5 potentially people in this room could have an undiagnosed sleep disorder which affects your health, affects your well-being, affects your cognition. So the very first thing that I would look at would be screening for sleep disorders amongst workers and following it up with effective treatment. As with our speaker regarding insurance policies and healthcare in Saudi, I think that would be the most effective and easy win is what we call in Australia in terms of implementing something that's simple that would be effective and impactful.
Great, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Now let's move to Matthew, sport. So Saudi Arabia has secured his place last night in the World Cup 2026. So it's a part of this is we are very proud, we are investing a lot in sport. So what is the role of sport and sleep, and specifically what are the kinds of preventive protocol to monitor system have you seen or implement to detect and reduce sleep problem in athletes?
So my background is in professional soccer. So my work with football clubs covers a whole range of activities, and I've seen very simple things from simple auditing techniques and systematic auditing techniques over 3 months, over daily check-ins. And the most effective elements of that is that they're individualised and tailored to the players. So that would be part one, is that we need to look at the whole player and develop individualised, holistic approaches to sleep. Things around chrononutrition, so players increasingly are playing on a Sunday, on a Wednesday, on a Saturday, the scheduling is increasingly cramped. So we have issues around when nutrition needs to be delivered, how it should be delivered, what sort of nutrition should be delivered. There's lots of good science now around protein intake and sleep and recovery assistance because of that. Things around footballers have inherently poor oral health. So having simple things like club dentists as well as club doctors can be really important, because players will ignore pain that might be affecting their sleep capacity. So they might ignore the filling at the back that needs to be dealt with and just wake up every couple of hours instead and drift back off. So there's lots of things that can be done. I think one of the most creative and innovative things was Manchester United had a deal with Marriott hotels. So every time they travelled to away games, and even the night before a home game, they would go and stay in a Marriott hotel. They also had a sponsorship deal with Silent Night, who make mattresses. So they had every player assessed for the best mattress from Silent Night. They then had specific rooms within the hotels they stayed in adapted for those players. So they had those mattresses put in those particular rooms so that the players were used to not only the mattress but the pillows that were provided, the bedding that was provided as well. So you can go from very basic auditing all the way through to infrastructure, sleep hygiene, activity as well.
Great, you are opening lots of avenues here, especially for our national team. I think the time is tight, but I just want to take the opportunity because Prof. Bahammam with us, he is the father of sleep medicine in our country, and if he's still with us, we want to take just a word from him about this conference, and if he's have any message that he want to deliver to the audience. Prof. Bahammam, still with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Yusuf. I would like to congratulate the organizers and the university for conducting this conference. As you mentioned, tackling sleep from this angle has not been probably done before in the whole region. Also inviting distinguished speakers from outside the country is a good chance also to give momentum to sleep medicine in the country and to also expose them to the development in sleep medicine practice in Saudi Arabia. We are glad in Saudi Arabia that we are currently heading the Asian Society of Sleep Medicine. We have led also the development of the accreditation of sleep and sleep technology in Asia and published that in 2021. Also, we led the task force committee that did the gap analysis of sleep medicine practice and training in Asia and published that also with the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Also, the Saudi team led the development of the Asian Sleep Medicine Fellowship curriculum, which was published December 2024. And all these are available online. The people can download it. And we look forward to more collaboration with our regional, continental, and international colleagues to have better care for our patient and better outcome. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Prof. Bahammam. And I just encourage every audience to try to speak with those international speakers with us to try to build a relationship, to build more research, because this is, I think, one of the unique opportunity in the country. Please use this wisely and try to connect even with the national expert who is attending this conference. And with this, I'll end this session and thank all of the panelists for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Dr. Al-Qurashi and all the panelists for this engaging discussion. We truly appreciate the valuable perspectives shared on institutional strategies for managing sleep disorders. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite you to visit the poster presentation exhibition. Please take this opportunity to engage with the presenters, ask questions, and explore their innovative work. Following the poster exhibition, we will have lunch and a prayer break. All attendees are kindly requested to be back shortly as the conference will resume with the next session. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We hope you found the poster presentation engaging and had the chance to interact with our talented researchers. Now, let us continue with a scientific session titled Cognitive and Psychological Effects of Sleep Disorders. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Muttab, consultant psychiatrist specialized in psychoanalysis and sleep disorders at King Khalid Hospital and King Saud University. Dr. Al-Nizi will be presenting a lecture titled Insights on the Bidirectional Relationship Between Sleep Disturbances and Mental Health Disorders. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Al-Nizi.
السلام عليكم. واضح الصوت؟ تسمعوني زين؟ اللي ورا؟ تمام. طيب first I would like to thank our colleagues for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be presenting amongst these distinguished speakers. I would like to thank you all for joining for today. And we're starting a little bit late, but hopefully we'll keep this, at 25 minutes. So today I'll be talking about the bidirectional relationship between sleep disturbances and mental health disorders. So as you might guess, this kind of discussion it's a very vast topic, and we can't really do any justice to this topic in such a short time. So what I'll be doing today is probably present some thoughts that I'm hoping you will find helpful, things that will invite reflection, will invite some good questions probably, rather than providing definitive answers. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience and my background in the field before we start. So I did psychiatry residency, and then I did a sleep medicine fellowship. And then I did a training in psychoanalysis for a few years after that. So it was about 7 years of training after I finished my fellowship. So what I'll be talking about today will probably, I'll be wearing different hats at different times, trying to have all these different fields meet somewhere in the middle. So I'm not going to be listing things or talking with very kind of dense amount of information. The talk is meant to whet your appetite to seeing connections relevant to the practice of sleep medicine. So the main ideas, I'll be talking about the bidirectional relationship, and they'll mention REM sleep, relationship to depression, some thoughts about that, and about post-traumatic stress disorder and obstructive sleep apnea. I'll be talking about psychoanalytic perspective, and then we'll go through some psychiatric diagnoses and sleep-related understanding of this. So when we think of the bidirectional relationship, essentially, it's a chicken and the egg kind of question. So if we look at a prime example of this, it will be the relationship between insomnia and depression. As you all know, depressed patients will probably have difficulty sleeping, but the question becomes, whether the difficulty with sleep is what is triggering the person or causing the person to have a low mood, or is it the other way around, that the person being depressed is what is causing them to have sleep difficulty. So maybe one other way to think about it, or maybe a resolution of this question, is to think that maybe they are both chicken, different kinds of chicken with different relationships, but it's not necessarily that one led to the other in every situation. So the three prime examples I thought of presenting about today, one of them is insomnia and depression. So insomnia is present in about 50% to 90% in some studies of depressed individuals. It is something that clearly impairs the quality of life. It might impair the response to depression therapy, and it might increase risk for depression recurrence and even suicidality. So if we look at the graph on the right, across the board, different measures that has to do with sleep are worse in depressed patients compared to controls. So if we think about subjective sleep quality, what the person is saying about their sleep, if we think of sleep latency, sleep duration, and so on, all of these are things that are worse in depressed patients compared to controls and patients who do not have depression. So one interesting area is to think about REM sleep and its relationship to our mood and its relationship to depression. I don't know if everybody here knows that, but it's this kind of interesting piece of information that is present in psychiatric textbooks about sleep deprivation as a potential treatment for depression, which is a bit counterintuitive. We usually think about telling patients that their good sleep is very important for their mood, and it's an important part of recovery and so on. So if this is the case, how come sleep deprivation can be helpful? I've actually worked with one of my mentors in Canada, where his interest in sleep medicine was sparked by a single patient that he saw in the inpatient unit of psychiatry. So there was this depressed individual where all of the medications were tried. They even went to do electroconvulsive therapy and took all the measures they could to treat that person's depression, and her mood wouldn't change. And then they thought, why don't we start or try sleep deprivation? So there are different kind of ways of doing that. So obviously it's not a very practical thing. But there's this kind of a schedule where you sleep deprive the patient and then you try to monitor the effect of this on their mood. So he said after 2 days of sleep deprivation, that patient looked like a very different individual. So he said, the mood symptoms completely cleared. She was talking differently, she was smiling. So right then and there, he felt that, this must be a very significant thing in our understanding of people's mood and psychiatric conditions, if it could have that much of an effect. So initially, this was thought of as a sleep deprivation, like in all stages of sleep. And later, this was thought of as, the treatment for depression is actually REM deprivation rather than a total sleep deprivation. Another piece of information here is that medications that are commonly used for depression, like SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, are actually medications that causes a suppression in REM sleep. And we do see that clinically in the lab. If we see someone who's on antidepressant medications, it is very likely that we'll see that they might not have REM sleep or very limited amount of REM, based on the fact that they are taking SSRIs. So this is another piece of information that fits into that discussion. The other thing is that it is really well established now that there is an importance for REM sleep for emotional processing and memory consolidation. So how do we put all of this together? So could it be that REM sleep functions like a copy machine or a Xerox machine, that it does nightly reprint emotions that are fed to the system? So in the case of a normal individual with healthy emotions, that their emotions might be more vivid, they might be more present, it might be healthier, if we can say that. But if that system is fed negative emotions, then maybe REM sleep is helping to strengthen and deepen that emotion, and therefore it might have a major role to play in potential treatment for depression when we attempt REM deprivation. So again, the practical considerations might limit the use of that, but I think it does have a very interesting value in research and in our thinking of depression and the psychological consequences of sleep changes. So another area that I feel is interesting, and it might invite some reflections and thoughts, is to think about post-traumatic stress disorder and obstructive sleep apnea. So an unanswered questions in psychiatry is when we think of post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm not really sure who are the audience today. I understand that you come from different backgrounds, so excuse me if I'm kind of talking about things in not very comprehensive terms. But post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder in psychiatry where the person undergoes a trauma, and after that trauma, they start re-experiencing whatever happened to them during that trauma, and it becomes something that affects their daily functioning. So they will have things like nightmares, flashbacks. They might be really on edge and anxious the whole time. They might have symptoms of arousal and not feel well, and have that trauma kind of hijack their lives, sort of thing. So not everyone who goes through trauma would end up developing PTSD. And I think it is very reasonable to think that the quality of the sleep of the individual following the trauma might be something that affects whether or not they go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So it was found that a surprisingly high percentage of PTSD patients has obstructive sleep apnea. This percentage is really, really high. So in some researches, it goes to 90%. So 90% of individuals, it was done in male combat veterans. So 90% of individuals who has PTSD were found to have obstructive sleep apnea. And, obviously the opposite is not true. So not everyone or almost everyone who has obstructive sleep apnea would be someone who's having post-traumatic stress disorder. So here it might be helpful to think about REM role in fear conditioning. So animal experiment shows that REM deprivation impairs the normal extinction of conditioned fear response. So is it plausible to think that maybe if the person did not have a good sleep with good REM periods following their trauma, that trauma might not be archived and processed in a way that would prevent PTSD symptoms. So as we know, in obstructive sleep apnea, things tend to be the worst at REM stage. And the reason for that is during REM stage, it's a stage of sleep where we have paralysis. So if the person has this paralyzed tongue and they have the throat to have the obstructive sleep apnea and there is a partial obstruction, it is likely to be worse during REM sleep. So REM sleep might be more interrupted because of obstructive sleep apnea. So, it is plausible that this could be a part of why some people would end up having PTSD. So in this discussion, it is very relevant to talk about dreams. Now, I'm not going to be talking about this in any sort of depth. I just wanted to mention that the psychoanalytic literature is it has a dizzying amount of theories and discussions of dreams, which are not usually a part of medicine, if we can say this. So, but the discussion of dream functions, why a certain individual might be dreaming, what happens, in terms of waking up, if they're waking up feeling scared, how they are processing that dream, what kind of things they are the recollection of that dream, and so on. And as we know, some of our patients in sleep medicine would be people who are having nightmares, and there are, therapies and things that we can be doing to try to help them. And there is this body of literature that talks about potential meaning for dreams. So this might be a good segue to talk about, some psychoanalytic thought. So the field of psychoanalysis is a field of study that looks at the unconscious, what might be behind the surface sort of thing. A very important concept of psychoanalytic thinking is to think of the unconscious. And the idea here is that the things that we do have access to cognitively and consciously might not tell the whole story. So if you think, for example, of people's personality and how they are shaped, we can't, comprehend or think that someone who's, going into adulthood, sitting down and thinking, I want my personality to be like this. I want to be someone who trusts people, or I want to be a perfectionist, or, things like that. So one way to look at it is that it's as if experience accumulates inside the person. It has to do with, how they are built genetically and their early experiences, and they will end up through their experiences and through how they are to have certain thoughts, certain tendencies, certain worries, certain preoccupations, and so on. They will have their defenses and ways of handling things, which might very well affect, what we see in our clinics in sleep medicine. So, psychoanalysis and psychiatry are not synonyms, so they might be looking at the same thing from different angles. Very generally speaking, when we think in psychiatry, there is this kind of categorization of things where it's as if we have these different pots where we put different diagnoses or different individuals who share same qualities in the same groups. But when we think psychoanalytically, we're thinking of that individual and how they are built and their own life experience. So the modern psychiatric classification is actually influenced by psychoanalysis. For example, if we think of guilt as a symptom of depression, it is there as one of the symptoms in the DSM-5. It comes from Freud's concepts on the kind of theorization behind how depression develops. Also, if we think in the DSM of the criterion that has to do with the poor functioning of the individual and their ability to meet their work demands and social demands, it might come from the concept of Freud talking about mental health as the ability to work and love. So there's a quote from Freud here. Even when investigation shows that the primary exciting cause of a phenomenon is psychical, which is mental, deeper research will one day trace the path further and discover an organic basis for the mental event. But if at the moment we cannot see beyond the mental, that is no reason for denying its existence. So an example of this, to my mind, is the concept of orthosomnia, which is a term coined in 2017. It is related to wearables. So essentially it is this idea that people who can be too preoccupied with the wearables to track their sleep and think of how good is it or not, and this ending up causing them to have some sleep difficulty. So, it is there is this psychological underpinning to it. And probably there are individuals before the availability of wearables who were preoccupied with this in a way that really affected their sleep. And here we can think of things like how some people might kind of talk about insomnia, although it's a difficult symptom that definitely could affect the person's health and functioning. But there's this thing where sometimes people, there are a few individuals like this, and we have seen some of them in our clinic. Some of them were actually in the media talking about not sleeping for a very long time. Some of them would claim that they didn't sleep for years. So, it makes you think, especially when, there's this observation where we see through the actigraphy or doing sleep studies that there is some sort of a sleep misperception by that person. So the insomnia complaint is very subjective. It has to do with, the lens with which the person is seeing his symptoms. And, when we think of sleep, insomnia can be at this intersection between what we do and what our bodies are doing. So, for example, if we try to compare sleep to digestion, for example, we cannot really claim that we can control how our digestive system works, or that we worry about not being able to control it, and so on. So if sleep was a bodily physiological function that is supposed to happen naturally, then what is the worry about sleep is doing to that? But maybe some people would think that sleep can be like exercise. It's something that you decide to do and then you can't do it. But the problem here is not having this switch off button that you can fully control. There is some degree of kind of allowing it to happen rather than actively trying to do it. So maybe the obsessionality, perfectionism, and thinking why I didn't get the sleep I'm entitled to have, it could be actually a part of the problem of insomnia. Just listing here some other example of relevant thoughts seen commonly in this intersection. So we can think of sleepiness as a dread of the day, avoidance of life. We do see clinical material that supports this thought when somebody has a change in their kind of situation, or have a stressor or a change in their work environment and so on, and having a reason to avoid doing the things that they usually do. Sometimes this might manifest as a development of sleepiness, like a new onset of sleepiness that wasn't there before. There are also other examples, but I'll move on for time's sake. So I'll talk about some psychiatric diagnoses and sleep-related understanding. So first of all, we need to think about what does a diagnosis in psychiatry mean. There are some nosological consideration here about the classification of disease. So the current way of classification we have is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it is something that is updated frequently. There are things in the current version that weren't there in the previous versions. An example of this would be illness anxiety. It's there in the new classification, but previously it was a part of the the somatoform disorders. But any good clinician, even there was this categorization of it, would have thought about it as an anxiety thing, where the person is anxious, and this is why they're having all these thoughts about the possibility of having an illness and so on. Another example would be depression and anxiety. There was a time in the classification that they were a part of the same category. There was a diagnosis of that. But currently, we don't have a diagnosis that links the two together, and we think of them as two separate disorders. So it is if we can say that, it's a human effort to try to classify mental disorders. So it's not really diseases in the way that we think of things that we know the pathophysiology of, but it's rather a categorization of things that are shared in common to have different groups of people that share the same presentation. And here I think fits into this discussion if we think about the pandemic era that we kind of forgot right now. But how was the reaction in terms of at the level of the society, at the level of the individuals? So from a psychological standpoint, probably there was nothing in the diagnostic manual that would help us navigate this. But there was clearly a level of very high anxiety. There were also some observations about things like paranoia developing, and large groups of people thinking that this has been designed, or they have been targeted intentionally by another group. And we know from our fields of study that paranoia can be a reaction to extreme anxiety. So if you think of someone who's in an alley or in a place where they're really terrified, they don't know what might happen, they're having this dread of something that is undefined, they can't really know who's the enemy, their anxiety might be channeled to, if they have an enemy or someone who's bothering them or doing this to them, or is a person who's turning off the light, although they will be angry and annoyed, but that feeling is much easier to the person than the existential dread they might have when they're really worried and they don't know who's causing that to them. So in bipolar disorder, sleep is a very kind of important symptom. It's one of the main symptoms that takes place, the lack of need for sleep. So when that thing changes, usually it is something that starts the process and it precedes, having a manic episode. So is sleeplessness a risk factor for manic episodes or a direct cause for relapse? In a comprehensive review in the early 90s, our colleagues here found that not only does total sleep deprivation have an antidepressant effect in patients suffering from depression, but that frequently total sleep deprivation can precipitate a manic or a hypomanic episodes in bipolar disorder. So, and here also we can think of Klein-Levin syndrome and things like the hypersexuality that is a symptom that can be in common with manic patients. The symptoms that might look like atypical depression and Klein-Levin syndrome patients. And also in terms of the lithium mechanism of action, which is one of the best medications we have for bipolar. Right now, we don't fully understand the mechanism of action for lithium, but there is a suggestion that it has an effect on the body clock. And some of this mediated through the work on this certain enzyme. So lithium is a treatment for Klein-Levin syndrome and bipolar disorder at the same time. So, there's clearly this very strong connection between the two. We kind of discussed some of the things that has to do with anxiety, but I just want to mention that anxiety is the most common psychiatric disorder, and it is a heterogeneous group for different disorders within the idea of having anxiety. People could have a obsessive compulsive disorder or a panic disorder or generalized anxiety and so on. And there's clearly this connection between being worried and having difficulty sleep, waking up with panic attacks, having a fragmented sleep, and so on. So I wanted to mention a few challenges when studying this relationship, this bidirectional relationship between sleep disorders and psychiatry. So in terms of what we discussed about the classification, it is relevant here to think that is it possible that we might have more luck if we studied the person's character traits, for example, of externalization or of thinking that there's another reason for something that is happening, not owning responsibility, being a perfectionist in relation to certain sleep difficulties, rather than trying to establish that relationship with disorders. So in terms of the question, what came first, we'll just go back to this at the end. So, we thought, is it the chicken or the egg? Then we thought maybe they are both chicken. And, it turned out that they might not even be chickens, and both of them are just fragmentations of different things. So I really hope that this talk raises more questions than answers and encourages you to think about that, relationship in more kind of individualistic way, thinking about the certain individual and what is their character traits, what are the things that they are struggling with, what is bothering them about their sleep versus what we can find about their sleep objectively, and so on. So the take-home messages, before the discussion of association, causation, or causation, the discussion of the reliability of the diagnosis and the two things we're trying to link is important. And I'm hoping that you would leave home with the thought that the clinical implications of thoughtfulness about the mental health in relation to sleep difficulty, can't be overemphasized. And that psychoanalytic thoughts are underrepresented in sleep medicine field and has the potential to have valuable contributions to our understanding of sleep difficulties. So with this, I'll end, and I thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Nisi, for that inspiring presentation. We will now open the floor for questions from the audience. If you have a question, kindly raise your hand, and the microphone will be brought to you, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, thank you. I have a question that we read sometimes that serotonin helps the sleep quality, but as the doctor said, the SSRIs affects the REM sleep, and I would like to know, is the SSRI actually helps sleep, or the serotonin, if it increases in the brain, will it help sleepness, or its effects? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry, I probably stepped away too soon. So it's a kind of complex question in terms of the relationship between SSRIs and sleep. But what I'll say about this is the theory that talks about serotonin kind of as a chemical juice that is deficient, and then we'll do something to change the availability of serotonin, is right now is not very well accepted as the main reason for why SSRI help with depression. There are thoughts about other things being involved in the effect of SSRIs. So the effect on REM sleep, that it reduces REM sleep, is very, very well established. So, and this is what I tried to put together, that probably there is something about REM sleep and depressed individual where it might act like a printing machine that prints emotions every night. So maybe there's something about the disturbance of this that can help with the mood. And this remains to be a theory. And I was just hoping that it will encourage us to think more thoughtfully about the effects of medications, and that it might not be very straightforward or something that we can kind of in a very direct way expect or know how it will affect the person. And actually the clinical experience supports that very much, because we can't really know exactly how a certain individual would respond to SSRIs. There are patients who will talk about sleeping restfully and in a much better way, and their mood is improving, and then they're feeling more restful after their sleep. And there are patients who talk about having nightmares, about waking up frequently, and so on. And different SSRIs might have a different profile in terms of how much sedation they cause and what kind of sleep the person gets after it. So I hope this answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will proceed to our next keynote presentation. It gives me great pleasure to once again introduce Dr. Ahmed Bahammam, President of the Asian Sleep Medicine Society and board member of the Saudi Sleep Medicine Society. Dr. Bahammam will be speaking on sleep and dementia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bahammam.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسعد الله مساءكم. Hello everyone. In the coming 25 minutes, hopefully I can summarize this topic, sleep and dementia, which is a difficult topic and a common topic. So I'll try to talk about, cover these areas, dementia and sleep, quick overview, sleep architecture in Alzheimer's disease pathology and sleep, circadian rhythm problems and its relation to Alzheimer's disease, obstructive sleep apnea, and Alzheimer and dementia cognitive dysfunction as well, management in general, because that's a big topic. So we'll talk briefly about non-pharmacological management, and then we'll cover only new pharmacological treatment because of the time. So Alzheimer's disease, as you know, is the most common type of dementia, so we'll focus on that. Most of the studies are done on Alzheimer's disease, and we know that patients with Alzheimer's disease, they suffer from a lot of sleep problems that can progress with time. We know also now that sleep problems actually may appear years before cognitive impairment, and thus can be used as possible biomarkers. And now, with the artificial intelligence, there are studies coming looking to the EEG analysis of elderly patients to predict who's likely to develop Alzheimer's. This is the hypnogram. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but these are the sleep stages here: awake, REM sleep, then stage N1, N2, and 3, which is we call deep sleep. So this is a normal subject. You can see that they get good amount of deep or slow wave sleep, like probably 20%, which happens mainly in the first third of the night. And the second hypnogram is a patient with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, or even the elderly people, they will have like less of deep sleep or slow wave sleep in 3, and more of sleep interruption and fragmented sleep. We'll come back to this and I'll explain it more. A recent meta-analysis of patients with Alzheimer's disease revealed that they have reduction in total sleep time, as we expect, sleep efficiency, percentage of N3 or slow wave sleep, deep sleep, also REM sleep reduction, decreased sleep spindles, which is important also for memory, and increase in sleep latency, wake after sleep, onset number of awakening, REM sleep latency compared to the controls. REM sleep is quantitatively reduced in Alzheimer's disease, and this may be related to dysfunction in the cholinergic neurotransmission. And we'll talk about this also as we go on. So decreased slow wave sleep, which is N3, and REM sleep were significantly associated with the severity of cognitive impairment in general, in addition to Alzheimer's disease. And we know that Alzheimer's disease is related to some changes like amyloid beta and tau protein. So what happens during slow wave sleep? During slow wave sleep, we know now for some time that brain is able to remove these waste products. So you can see when people sleep properly and when they are sleep deprived on the right side, these are the waste products that we don't like, especially the amyloid beta and tau protein. You see it when we sleep good, it's clear, so it is less. And when we have sleep deprivation, it is more concentrated. And now we get more ideas about how this cleaning mechanism works. So neuronal firing is lower in slow wave sleep because we have slow synchronized waves, and this gives chance for clearing of the waste products. Therefore, inadequate sleep may increase this problem. Also, tau protein deposits have been linked to sleep problems. In addition to Alzheimer's disease, also it causes sleep problems. And these two figures from this study, which is also some time ago, showing that with sleep loss, beta amyloid and tau protein levels increase. Recently, probably most of you are aware of something they discovered. We know the lymphatic system, which like draw things into the lymphatic system in the body. They attributed now that the lymphatic system plays an essential role in clearance of these waste products we talk about it, which is usually extracellular, or what you can think of it as waste products that come from neuronal cells in the brain. So these are the waste products, and here are the neural cells. We have the arteries and the veins, and with the pulsation of the arteries, as you can see here, we'll be able to wash the waste product. So as you can see, we'll wash it, we'll go to the venous system, then to the lymphatic system. So during alertness, the lymphatic clearance is reduced by 90%. And that's why we need sleep, especially slow wave sleep, to clear these waste products. And we know also that this system function decreases as we get older. So if we are getting older and getting less sleep, then we are prone to have Alzheimer's disease. This is a recent study just published in Nature Biomedical Engineering. I don't know if you have seen it or not. We know now from the animal studies, most of the studies I presented earlier were animal studies. We know from animal studies that the lymphatic function increased by reduced heart rate, and this is what happens when we go to sleep, we have less heart rate. Also increased arterial pulsation, so we need normal cardiac function. Reduce EEG beta power, so we need less frequency, less activity in the brain, and increase delta power, which is the waves that we have in slow wave sleep. Recently, this group described a portable wireless device they put in the ear that can accurately measure the lymphatic clearance in humans, and showed results that are comparable to what we know from animal studies, that sleep, both slow wave sleep and REM sleep, are important to clear these waste products. Again, to this hypnogram I showed you before, you remember, this is the slow wave sleep, REM sleep, and the clearance, lymphatic flow is highest in slow wave sleep and then REM sleep. It doesn't work well in other stages like stage 1 and into what happens with the elderly or patient with Alzheimer's disease. We know also now that patients with Alzheimer's disease, they have circadian rhythm dysfunction. And in addition to sleep deprivation, circadian rhythm problems and disruption of the circadian rhythm may also enhance the development of Alzheimer's disease manifestations. So both sleep aspects, sleep duration and quality, and also circadian rhythm. Another factor that we discovered recently also is the orexin. Orexin, we know, it's a hypothalamic neurotransmitter that it is an excitatory neurotransmitter causes wakefulness. And you know, probably most of you know that orexin deficiency causes type 1 narcolepsy. So it has been shown that has a role also to play in this problem. Dysregulation of the orexigenic system has also been implicated in the earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease. So it's not only sleep deprivation, also neurotransmitter. And dysregulation of the orexin system also was reported to be associated with increased amyloid beta. This animal study in rats showed that injection of orexin into the lateral ventricle increased wakefulness and interstitial amyloid beta levels. So orexin high levels increase that. We still need more studies on that to see what are the clinical implications, but bear with me with this because when we talk about the management, you need to remember this. This suggests that sleep disorders are regulated by interaction between amyloid beta and orexin. This is the theory that probably these two have to work together. We have to remember that orexin causes wakefulness. So it is proposed that orexin might hinder amyloid beta degradation, leading to accumulation of amyloid beta. So Alzheimer's disease, they already have sleep-wake cycle disruption. We know that, and circadian rhythm problems. And as we said with the sleep problems, the disruption of the circadian rhythm may actually precede the appearance of Alzheimer's disease. So this can be also something to monitor as a biomarker. So circadian rhythm changes in Alzheimer's have been linked with sleep fragmentation at night and increased sleep and decreased activity in the daytime. These changes may precede the manifestation of cognitive function decline. Also, problems with the clock gene expression. You know that we have several clock genes. These are in the picture. They also, in Alzheimer's disease, have been shown to have problems and alteration in these gene functions. Many studies demonstrated that amyloid beta accumulation clearly linked to circadian rhythm. And these are data accumulating now. And most of these studies, as you can see, they go to Nature and to the top journals because they are very important. So we talk about sleep deprivation, we talked about orexin, we talk about circadian rhythm. Also, you have to remember that the immune cells responsible for clearing amyloid beta from the interstellar spaces also follow 24-hour circadian oscillation. So if we disrupt our circadian rhythm, these cells also, they do not function well, leading to accumulation of amyloid beta. Obstructive sleep apnea, you know, probably have talks about that. It's a common sleep problem. This is just to show you the link between OSA and Alzheimer's disease. This is a meta-analysis of 5 studies showed that OSA was more prevalent in Alzheimer's disease. And another meta-analysis of 9 observational studies showed that presence of OSA was likely to increase the cognitive decline in patients with Alzheimer's disease. So it may affect also the cognitive function. And this autopsy study showed that patients with Alzheimer's disease that coexist with obstructive sleep apnea, they have greater or higher level of amyloid beta plaques in the autopsy study. So there is a link also between OSA presence and the increased manifestation of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive function. Therefore, probably we need to treat that. This is a more recent study suggested that also complement proteins were implicated in cognitive impairment in patients with OSA. So we have a lot of these biomarkers that can be used with AI now as biomarkers to detect like which ASA patient group are likely to have like cognitive decline. This is one of our patients. This is a patient with Alzheimer's disease. You can see up here the hypnogram, sleep interruption, no REM sleep, little REM sleep here, no slow wave sleep. You see here, this pinkish color is hypopneas and interrupted sleep. And this is, you see the hypnogram, you see the hypopneas with some desaturation episodes. And then the patient was started on CPAP, as you can see here at the bottom, and hypopneas disappear, and the patient start to have more regular sleep, less awakening, and start to have REM sleep. No slow wave sleep, but the sleep quality was better. So does treating sleep apnea patient reduce the progress of Alzheimer's disease? This is something, again, we need to work on. So if you put this just to imagine what's the link between sleep and Alzheimer's disease and dementia, we put here sleep deprivation, we have tau aggregation, amyloid beta deposition, neuroinflammation, we discussed that, neurotrophic factors, then reactive oxygen species generation, cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. Then you can add to that circadian rhythm problems that we discussed, and you can add to it also dysregulation of the oxygen system, and this will lead us to the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's disease and sleep and the link between them. Now I'll move to the management of sleep disorders in Alzheimer's disease. Most of the treatment we use now aim to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. if we can prove that treating sleep problems help Alzheimer's disease, then we'll be targeting one of the main causes of increased risk of cognitive function decline. So we can treat the primary cause rather than just slowing the progress, but this needs more research to prove this concept. So as you do with any other patient, you need a thorough assessment of the patient, medical history, including assessment of comorbidities that can affect thyroid function and other medication, environmental factors. Polysomnography is not needed in all patients unless we suspect something like obstructive sleep apnea, if they have Alzheimer's disease, or REM sleep behavior disorders. Not very common, but you see it in Alzheimer's disease, not as common as in Parkinson, but it is also present. If you suspect, then we do sleep study for them with video monitoring. We have to remember that they also have higher risk of restless legs syndrome. Non-pharmacological approach is considered, as with any other problem, the first line of treatment. This is very important to remember. And among the interventions that are very effective in slowing the progress of Alzheimer's disease is exercise. There are good data on that. And since long time, since like more than 20 years, we start with this kind of data. Observational studies of nursing home patients with severe dementia showed that excessive daytime napping was associated with relatively more disrupted nocturnal sleep, implying that probably restriction of daytime napping might have beneficial effect. Though you have to keep in mind that application or applying this daytime restriction of napping in the elderly can be very challenging. Very challenging. It is very challenging. Bright light therapy, there have been some studies like years ago showing that probably bright light therapy in the elderly will help in improving their nocturnal sleep. And studies have been done in nursing homes. I'll come to this point again with the Alzheimer, but we know that it probably helps to improve sleep quality of elderly at night. Stimulants like coffee or tea, if you decide to use it, you have to be like consume in moderation, because elderly people, they don't have like the same response like young adults who have to know if they have like atrial fibrillation or other problem. We have to be cautious with the effect of caffeine, but can be used. Nighttime exposure to noise and light should be reduced to improve circadian rhythm and then improve also sleep quality. And then we should apply all sleep hygiene practices and relaxation techniques that probably have been discussed or will be discussed throughout this conference. I think one of the main aspects of this conference is CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And this is considered to be the first line therapy for chronic insomnia, as you know. In the elderly, several studies and systematic review meta-analysis has shown that CBTI actually is the best and is superior to pharmacological therapy in several randomized control trials. And also data on cognitive function is still less, but we are getting some data now to support that. A randomized control trial of CBTI in mild cognitive impairment and insomnia demonstrated significant improvement in sleep onset latency, sleep efficiency, wake after sleep onset, and insomnia severity. CBTI has been also shown to improve cognitive function in older adults with mild cognitive impairment, and currently is being evaluated to see if it can reduce amyloid beta deposition. There is actually a randomized control trial which is registered. I visited the registration site before this lecture to see if they reported preliminary data on that, but still no data are reported. If they can show, if they show that CBTI actually reduce amyloid beta deposition in patients with Alzheimer's disease, that will be really a great achievement. Light therapy, Cochrane review reported insufficient evidence to recommend that, like for patients with dementia. We don't have evidence, but if you use it moderately, try to improve their sleep at night, it may help. Another systematic review meta-analysis demonstrated a significant small to medium effect size for sleep problems. So it may improve sleep, but we don't have much data on cognitive function. The review also noted difficulties in precision because many patients, they have different circadian rhythm, because when you expose them to light therapy, you have to see what circadian rhythm they have and try to modify their circadian rhythm and time flight exposure based on that. Now I'll move quickly to pharmacological therapy. Melatonin, just quickly, there is no evidence until now that it is effective in systematic review and in Cochrane review also. Benzodiazepines, we know that it increases the risk of parasomnias. Also, it's a risk factor for cognitive dysfunction, increase the risk of falls, and probably stroke have been reported also in this systematic review. Another systematic review, 2016, in neuroepidemiology, concluded that there was 78% increased risk of Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia with the use of benzodiazepine or Z drugs like zobiclone and zolpidem. The American Geriatric Society Beers criteria cited both benzodiazepines and Z drugs as potentially inappropriate for use in the elderly, so we don't recommend these. So this is probably enough for benzodiazepines because I want to have some time for questions. Cochrane review also could not identify any single well-conducted randomized controlled trial for benzodiazepines or Z drugs. Now we'll come to the DORA, the double orexin receptor antagonist. Remember, we talked about orexigenic effect on beta amyloid. You know, we have receptors orexin 1 and 2. These receptors that work on the medication that block these receptors, orexin A and B. And drugs have been approved by the FDA, as you know, for the DORAs. We'll talk briefly about them. This is a mice model study that have shown that intracerebroventricular infusion of almorexant, which is one of the DORAs that have been used initially, not probably used now, decrease intracerebral fluid levels of amyloid beta and increase total sleep time. This is an animal study. We don't have such an evidence in humans yet. A randomized controlled trial BST study in patients with mild to moderate AD also showed improvement in sleep duration, objective improvement with the sulforaxant. We'll talk about sulforaxant. The improvement was mainly in the last third of the night. This is the time when most elderly people will have sleep disruption. So sulforaxant compared to placebo improves sleep in the last third of the night, improves sleep architecture as well. But next day somnolence was 4.2. And also the risk of fall was there, but it was not very high. It was like 2.1%. So as with other sleep medications, the risk of falls in the elderly is always there, which is a nightmare for sleep medicine physicians. FDA sulforaxant was approved 2020, and lemborexant was also approved before that. The Vigo is available in the kingdom now, lemborexant. I'll show you about the meta-analysis, recent data on them. They all show improvement in sleep duration. An earlier Cochrane review in 2020 found moderate certainty support for orexin support antagonist, increasing total sleep time and decreasing WASO. But then we have data after that, which showed more encouraging. These are two papers. Sorry, I did not put the QR code for you. I was planning to put it, but I got busy, I forgot. But you can take photos of them. One of them is 2024 in sleep, and the other one, the American Geriatric Psychiatry, 2025. I'll present the data quickly of the two. In this one, in 2025, sulforaxant 10 to 20 milligram increase total sleep time, reduce wake after sleep onset. This in patients with Alzheimer's disease, not in the elderly in general. And lemborexant 5 milligram also improved circadian rhythm. So overall benefit modest, but statistically significant improvement in objective sleep measures across DORAs. This is the 2024 systematic review in sleep, which showed that treatment-related adverse events was higher with DORA, 69%, with the risk ratio of 1.6 across all medications, so they have higher risk compared to placebo. There is no difference in discontinuation rate or serious adverse events between the drugs and the placebo. Most common side effects were somnolence 3 times, fatigue 2.5 times, but sleep paralysis also. You know that orexin has to do with the other manifestation of narcolepsy and REM sleep. So sleep paralysis also increased by 3.4%. What about acetylcholine esterase inhibitor, which is the main treatment like Dompesil for Alzheimer's disease? It increases REM sleep, decreases stage 2, decreases sleep efficiency, no effect in slow wave sleep, no significant difference between groups was reported like in wake after sleep onset, total sleep time, REM sleep, slow wave sleep, and apnea, hypopnea, index or leg movements. What about insomnia and Alzheimer's disease? Just I'll present one study. This is the Hunt study, 11-year follow-up of 7,500 participants with probable insomnia disorder called BID. And BID and insomnia symptoms did not increase the risk of dementia in this study. So at least from this study, there is no increased risk if you have insomnia or so the patient has insomnia that they will have. We have to know that. Again, we have to know that sleep deprivation is different than insomnia. They are not the same disease and they may have different manifestation. But we need to look into the different phenotypes of insomnia. We can't label them all as one type of insomnia. So we need more details to have clear results. So I'll go to the final remarks after this quick overview. Insomnia in the setting of Alzheimer's disease presents a unique and complex disease entity both to diagnose and manage. Patients with Alzheimer's disease and the caregivers suffer in terms of quality of life and potential health consequences due to lack of control of symptoms. Behavioral intervention should be considered as the first line in the management. Pharmacological therapies can be used as adjunctive therapy. Again, we need more data on that. Probably DORAs are promising, we'll come to that. Data on the efficacy and safety of pharmacological therapy are limited. I omitted the slide about other medication like antidepressant, antipsychotic, doxybin, Remeron, or all these, because there is no evidence. There is no evidence that they help. That's why I skipped them because of the time. DORAs appear to be one class of agents with greater optimism based on current evidence. We need more data like Suvorexant and Naproxen, both of them. Treatment again should be individualized, as Dr. Nus'ad mentioned. So we need like personalized treatment, and high quality studies on the current agent for insomnia are needed with a search for individual markers to guide individual treatment. So we need more research. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bahammam, for your informative lecture. To stay on schedule, we will only take, please, one question from the audience. We apologize for this. Thank you very much, Dr. Bahammam. I think there is no questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are delighted to welcome our next distinguished speaker, Professor Stephen Robinson, Professor in the Department of Health and Biomedical Sciences in the College of Science, Engineering and Health at RMIT University, Australia. Professor Robinson will be presenting impact of OSA severity on neuropathological changes in the human hippocampus. Please join me in welcoming Professor Robinson.
Good afternoon. I'd like to firstly acknowledge the organizers for such a wonderful meeting in a wonderful venue in a wonderful city, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Also, thank you for staying. I know. I'll be talking today about, hang on, we'll just move through. The impact of OSA severity on the neuropathology of the brain. Now, I know that many of you here are not neuropathologists. You don't know much about the brain. Don't get scared off. I'm going to keep it simple and just direct your attention to the key points. So stay with us. As you've heard in the previous excellent presentation by Dr. Ben Hammam, obstructive sleep apnea can lead to a whole range of effects on behavior and also physiology, including, as you can see, severe intermittent hypoxia, sleep disruption, which we've heard a lot about already at this meeting, elevated nocturnal blood pressure, vascular disease, impairments in memory, particularly in autobiographical memory. That's when you tell about what you've done in your own life. And an increased risk, as we heard in the previous presentation, of Alzheimer's disease. Now, we're trying to understand how all of those physiological changes might affect the brain, or maybe they don't. I'll enlighten you today. We know from MRI imaging that there is swelling and also shrinkage in various parts of the brain in people with sleep apnea, but we don't know really what's going on at the cellular level. Now, I had the privilege of having been granted access to brain tissue from people in Iceland who had been followed as part of the medical system there. We knew what their medical history was. We knew that they had sleep apnea. We knew how severe their sleep apnea was, and we knew whether or not they used CPAP to treat their sleep apnea. And then sometime after their original diagnosis, they passed away, and their brains were autopsied and preserved. And I was given privileged access to that tissue to do a neuropathological investigation of what that brain tissue looked like. And this enabled us to ask a number of questions. And you can see them listed there. I don't need to read them. You can read them. And I'll go through and talk about the data and what our data tells us about the answers to those particular questions. So I'll start off with talking about the changed thickness of different regions of the hippocampus. But before I do that, this is the cohort we had. We had 34 people. We stratified them with respect to whether they're CPAP users or not CPAP users. And as you can see there, I won't go through all the details, they're very well evenly matched, except, of course, we did get a significant difference in BMI because those who use CPAP tend to have more severe sleep apnea and hence have a greater BMI as well. This is, on the left-hand side, you can see a brain that's been stained with something called crescent violet. It's a very simple stain, but it labels cell bodies, and the more cell bodies you have, the darker the part of the stain. That's a section that's cut through coronally, through the head this way. You can see a very squiggly shape going around there. It looks very complicated, but just focus on a couple of areas. You'll see at the top there, there's an area that looks like an arrowhead, very dark little line. That's called the fimbria. That's shown in high resolution on the right-hand side. Imagine it like a mushroom cap. You know what a mushroom looks like? And you've got a stem on the mushroom. Imagine taking your knife and cutting through the top of the cap and through the stem. This is the shape you'd get. You recognize it now? So that's called the hilus. And it's very distinctive, and we can measure parts of it. We can measure the length from one side to the other, as is shown there. And we can also measure the overall thickness or the overall area. And I'll be showing you changes in that as we look at people with sleep apnea. There are other areas around the hippocampus. They all have an important role to play in memory. I'll be talking about a couple of them, CA4 and CA1. Don't worry too much about the names. Just worry about what we see in terms of the changes. So here we have sections through that mushroom cap, the hilus and dentate gyrus. And we were able to do measurements of the brains of each of those 34 people, and you can see them here on the scatter plot. What I'd like you to notice is that in the top graphs, you can see that there's a gradual down slope of that graph, and on the bottom of those axes, it's the ODI. That indicates the severity of sleep apnea. So what it's telling us is that as the sleep apnea gets more severe, the overall size of these areas gets smaller. They shrink. When we look at the bottom two graphs, where you've got red dots and black triangles, what we've done is we separated those into two groups. One group that used CPAP and one group that didn't. And what you can see there, I hope, is that the slope is much steeper on the black line than it is on the red line. And if you've got good enough eyesight, you'll see that the probability or the p-value for those slopes changes too. So that in fact, if you use CPAP, you actually protect the brain from shrinkage, at least this part of the brain. Whereas if you don't use CPAP, you get increased shrinkage. When we look at another region, CA1, we see exactly the same effect. So on the right-hand side, you can see this is their cross-sections through CA1. I think you'll notice that where it says low ADI, that's generally mild sleep apnea. You'll see that, say, layer 1, which is at the bottom of the slide there, is much thinner in the high ODI group than in the low ODI group. Similarly with layer 3. Again, when we stratify, as you can see in the bottom graph there, for CPAP users and non-CPAP users, we see that CPAP is protective. So it protects against that shrinkage that we'd see in those layers of the brain. Now, of course, if you're getting shrinkage, what that's indicating is you're getting neurons in these regions that are dying. And because they die, there's no more material there, so that's why it shrinks. Now here we come to a different story. This is the entorhinal cortex. It's a bit further around in the hippocampal formation. This is a more myelinated region of the brain. You can see it, this is stained brown because the brown shows up the myelin in this case. And the bottom line of the message I want you to take home here is this myelinated region also shows quite profound reductions in thickness with increased OSA severity. However, CPAP does not protect against that loss. So this is a different story to the other regions I was telling you about. This is a summary slide from what I've just been talking about over the last few slides. And it's simply reminding us that we lose the molecular layer and dentate gyrus and the length of the hilus, the thickness of the layers of the entorhinal cortex are reduced, and CA1 is also reduced, and all of those three areas are protected if you use CPAP. But in the orange box, we lose myelin from the entorhinal cortex, and CPAP is not protective. All right, now I'm going to tell you something that no one else has heard of. You're the world first to hear this. I've just released it for special release for Saudi Arabia. And this is telling you about the blood vessels that supply the hippocampus. Now, as you'd imagine, the brain uses a lot of blood, or rather it uses the oxygen in the blood. And in a disease like sleep apnea, where you're getting hypoxia, these blood vessels become very important. And we were very interested to see, is there a compensatory response? As the severity of sleep apnea gets worse, do we get more blood vessels to help to provide more oxygen to the hippocampus? No one knew. It's an unknown answer to a question that's pretty hard to answer, but we were able to look at it in our tissue. This time we stratified our groups with, according to whether they're low OSA or high OSA. Pretty well balanced, as you can see. The only difference, of course, is that the ODI or severity of the sleep apnea is greater in one group than the other, as you'd expect. Now, we've stained the sections this time with a marker that shows blood vessels selectively, and what you can see, little worms here, are actually fragments of blood vessels that are in the hippocampus. You don't see the whole thing because we're looking at a very thin slice. So imagine you had a bowl of spaghetti and you froze it, and then you took a slice through that bowl of spaghetti, a very, very thin slice. You just see bits of the spaghetti. You won't see the whole length of it. So that's pretty much what you're seeing here. We then used a computer program to measure the width right along the length of each of these pieces of blood vessel and calculate also the length along the midline of each of those splines to provide an objective measure of blood vessel length and blood vessel width and blood vessel number. And this is what I'm going to show you now. Lots of bars here. And don't worry about them too much, except notice that some of the bars are very light grey and some are stripy and darker. The light grey ones are the mild sleep apnea group. The stripy ones are the highest sleep apnea group. And you'll see that for most of those three graphs there, there's no difference. There's no significant difference between the two groups, with a couple of small exceptions. So the fimbria on the left-hand panel here, which is mean blood vessel diameter, we see an increase in diameter in the fimbria in people with severe sleep apnea. We also see a small increase in vessel diameter in the CA1. And then on the second panel across the blood vessel length, we see slightly longer vessels in the fimbria, but nowhere else. What surprised us was the lack of difference. We expected to see these huge differences, lots more blood vessels in sleep apnea or severe sleep apnea. You just don't see it. It looks like the hippocampus isn't able to compensate for hypoxia. And that's a really interesting finding, because you probably know that if somebody has a drowning accident where they're deprived of oxygen for 3 or 4 minutes or maybe a little bit longer, and then they're resuscitated, they lose their memory because the hippocampus seems to be very, very sensitive to hypoxia. And what this is telling us is perhaps one of the reasons it's sensitive to hypoxia is it can't compensate by making new blood vessels. We went on to look at abnormal blood vessels. These are blood vessels that have disease. And I won't bore you with too much detail, but basically diseased blood vessels aren't like nice pieces of spaghetti. They're not nice and smooth and the same width all the way around. They have little squishy bits where they're thinner, or they have knobs, or as you can see, the variety that are shown here. What happens when you get these constrictions of the blood vessels is oxygen can't get through. So it makes the problem even worse. And generally when we see diseased blood vessels, it's because there's an ongoing process of damage already occurring in that region. When we mapped the hippocampus and the different hippocampal regions to see which regions show diseased vessels, we found one area stood out very clearly, and that is CA1. And you can see in all 4 panels here, we looked at 4 different types of blood vessel disease. They were all massively overrepresented in area CA1. Now, if you can remember back a couple of slides earlier, we didn't see any compensatory change in CA1 at all. There was no increase in blood vessel width or length. And this area seems to be particularly prone to damage, probably because it's suffering from oxygen or lack of oxygen. I'll now go on to the third part of presentation. This was actually presaged in our previous talk. He mentioned this slide, he showed this slide. This is from our work where we looked for evidence of damage of Alzheimer's pathology, so plaques and tangles. Now, you all know that plaques and tangles are features of Alzheimer's disease. And on the far right-hand side, we actually were able to access some Alzheimer brain tissue from the same brain bank. This particular person had no OSA, no ODI of I think 1.4. And you can see the tangles on the top. They're the dark blobs, for want of a better word, slightly triangular. And the plaques are those round, smudgy things that you can see. They don't look all that impressive, but they're very characteristic. And as you can see from the series of photos I have here, as you get increased severity of Alzheimer's, of sleep apnea, you get an increase in plaques and you get an increase in tangles. As you can see here, in low OSA, you see quite a few tangles, but you don't see many plaques. Whereas in severe or high OSA, you get a lot of both. This is a summary slide to give you a sense of what's going on. Again, don't worry too much about the areas. Notice that they start in that area not far from the entorhinal cortex in an area called the collateral sulcus. And as severity of OSA increases, they spread out, not just being restricted to that area, but then they spread out particularly to CA1 region, which is further up. When we look at people who use CPAP, we see a small reduction in both plaques and tangles, but not nearly as much as we would think or would expect. We did some statistical analysis using something called ordinal regression analysis. And what we found was if we look at plaque burden and we look at it in terms of severity of OSA, there seems to be a very strong correlation. But then when we plug in other variables such as age, sex, BMI, and CPAP use, we still see that strong correlation. So what this is showing us is that the plaques that we see in these brains is caused by OSA, and particularly by the severity of the OSA. It's that loss of oxygen that seems to be driving the appearance of plaques. When we do the same analysis with tangles, we were surprised to find that that correlation was lost once we plugged in those additional variables. And in fact, age was the main predictor of the distribution of tangles. So here we have an interesting story. We see plaques and tangles in OSA, but only the plaques are caused by the hypoxia of OSA, whereas tangles seem to be just caused by the fact that people are getting old, and perhaps the group that we had more severe OSAing was slightly older. So to summarise, the 5 questions that you read and I didn't read at the beginning of my talk, which hippocampal regions are most vulnerable to OSA? Well, we found that the hyalus, the dentate gyrus, CA1 and the entorhinal cortex are, and the myelinated area of the entorhinal cortex becomes thinner. We found that with increasing severity, vessels in the Fimbria and CA4 regions increase in size, but the CA1 region doesn't respond, but it has an increase in diseased vessels. We found plaques and tangles in many of the brains, but we found that, in fact, as I mentioned, that the main driver of tangles was age, and the main driver of plaques was the severity of hypoxia. And that, of course, suggests that there is a very clear link between Alzheimer's disease and OSA. The question was, is neuropathology worse than severe OSA? And the answer, of course, is yes. And is CPAP use protective? Well, yes, it does protect, but only partly. It protects against the cell loss that we see in the hippocampus, which causes the shrinkage, but it doesn't protect against the myelin loss. It doesn't protect against the burden of plaques, and it doesn't protect against the burden of tangles. So these degenerative changes are permanent. And this is important. For many of you, I know you probably are working in the area of sleep clinics where you're looking at diagnosing people who have OSA. And it's very important to be aware of this data, because what we've found is that you can't repair the brain entirely just by putting someone on CPAP. Some of it can be repaired, but a lot of it is a permanent change that is going to be detrimental to that person's cognition. So if you can catch it early, then you're going to really benefit that person and their health. These are the people that helped to do the work. Jessica Owen and Chui Xu were 2 of my PhD students who did most of the work. Professor Thoran Gislason and Brindis were my 2 colleagues in Iceland who facilitated access to this brain tissue. And I thank you again. The one word I've learned since I've been here in Saudi is shukran, and shukran jazilan. Thank you very much. Should I stay here this time?
Thank you very much, Professor Robinson, for your insightful presentation. We will open the floor for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, please.
This person here.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. My question, I'm not an expert in this field, and very far from it. I'm an artist. But I just wanted to understand, how would we catch OCA early? If you said it's better that if we can catch it early, then it's probably better treatable. For somebody like that doesn't know everything, I mean, what are the simple symptoms?
That's a really good question. It doesn't matter that you're an artist.
Okay.
It's actually quite hard to detect. There's a subgroup of people that suffer from excessive daytime sleepiness. So they're always sleepy, lacking in energy, and as a result, they'll often eat a lot of sugary foods to give them energy. So that's a warning sign. They may snore. That's another indicator. A lot of people who snore, not everybody, but a lot of people who snore have sleep apnea. So if your partner or a family member snores, then it might be a good idea to recommend them for a sleep study, particularly if they like sugary foods and they complain of excessive daytime sleepiness.
Thank you.
Oh, another behind.
Hello, Doctor.
Hello.
Thank you for the insightful presentation. I want to ask just one question. What you represent is that there is some unreversible damage. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So is any people actually tried or done any research on how to reverse or how to look to the first intervention that maybe could reverse the damage?
That's a very good question. I think we're probably the first to show that there is neuropathology that isn't preventable with CPAP. And so at this point, I don't think a lot of people have tried to see whether there might be another way, in addition to CPAP, that could prevent it or reverse it. Personally, I think it's unlikely you can reverse the demyelination, because we know from other disease states that once you have demyelination, such as in multiple sclerosis, you generally don't get a recovery, or not a very effective one. So I'd go back to that earlier point, that it's very important, I think, to catch sleep apnea early, even if it's not severe enough to affect the activities of daily living, because we're seeing that if you don't catch it early, you may end up getting irreversible brain damage, effectively, that will show up later on as impairments in things like autobiographical memory, spatial memory, and ultimately Alzheimer's disease.
Thank you.
I think this will be the last one. Yes?
Thank you so much for this delighted lecture. I love the analogy of using the food, the mushroom and spaghetti. Help me think about it. So, do we have any idea about the duration of CPAP use, for how long, for how many years, for those who have positive effects on the brain structure?
Yes, we have records for each of those individuals. The average duration, I did put it in the slides in the summary table, but you probably missed it. I went maybe too quickly. It was on average about 7.5 years of CPAP use before they died. And that was because that's when they were diagnosed. It's very likely, that's a very insightful question you've just asked, because it's very likely that these people went for a sleep study because they were already complaining of fairly severe symptoms. And that reinforces the point I've been making, is that we need to catch people even before their symptoms become severe. So perhaps if these people had been treated for 14 years with CPAP rather than for 7, we would have seen a complete protection. So thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Robinson. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Russell Conduit once again, Associate Professor in the Department of Health and Biomedical Sciences in the College of Science, Engineering and Health at RMIT University, Australia. Dr. Conduit will be presenting shift-related sleep disorders, fatigue, and cognitive impairments. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Conduit. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the organising committee and everyone that, again, is still here to hear me speak. It's a magnificent country, and I'm very honoured to be able to speak today, so thank you. So I'll be talking to you today about shift-related sleep disorders, fatigue, and cognitive impairments. We have known for a very long time that in the evening we make mistakes, and we're more likely to make mistakes and have cognitive failures in the evening as opposed to the daytime. This is very old data from the 1980s showing that in the early hours of the evening, operators make more errors just reading meters, and there's more fatigue-related accidents in the early hours of the evening. Because in the evening, we are less alert and we make mistakes. And we've known this for a very long time. However, what can be a very small mistake in some situations can be very tragic mistakes in certain circumstances. And the time of night shift is a time of some of the most tragic accidents in history. Nuclear disasters have been related back to operational error of people engaging in shift work in the early hours of the morning on the end of extended shifts. Chernobyl, in 1:23 a.m, operator error was led back to why that particular disaster happened. 3 Mile Island, which was another nuclear disaster, which was almost a complete meltdown, occurred at the end of it, towards the end of a 4 to 6 a.m. shift, where workers had been working for extended periods of time. Industrial accidents, such as the Exxon Valdez oil spill, occurred when operators were working on extensively long shifts, and the operator error happened at about midnight. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill was when people were on the end of 12-hour shifts on the 19th to 20th consecutive day of a 21-day rotation, happening in the early hours of the morning. And this is only a few aviation accidents where pilots working across multiple time zones have had accidents related to equivalent of nighttime operational errors. So although we are vulnerable to making mistakes, and sometimes very tragic mistakes, shift work is an essential part of what we do. Night shift workers comprise 20% of the workforce. They're the backbone of a 24/7 society that we have now. Essential workers, a range of different types of workers, are required to work around the clock. So we need people to be working in shifts and working in shifts at night. However, when people do this, it involves a mismatch between working in these night hours and our circadian system's diurnal pattern. So over on the far right, my diagram there represents circadian misalignment. When we are forced to work when we're working at night at a period when we are not optimal based on our internal biological clock. So night shift requires working and sleeping out of phase with the endogenous circadian, our internal circadian clock. And because this occurs, this induces problems with our sleep. The study Burisma in 2022 looked at 37,000 shift workers. And of these, 50% of night shift workers had at least one sleep disorder. 26% had 2 or more sleep disorders. And 50% got less than 6 hours of sleep per 24-hour period. So these are quite extreme and surprising results that people working on night shifts and working in shift work are very vulnerable to being able to sleeping poorly and having sleep disorders. And we've already heard from the previous 2 speakers, having deprivation of sleep, having poor sleep, what effects that has on health. And this is to a point where we now recognise a phenomenon known as shift work sleep disorder. And this is where people have a primary complaint of insomnia or excessive sleepiness, and these symptoms are chronic for at least 3 months with this circadian misalignment. And this shift work sleep disorder has a prevalence of around about 30%, about 1 in 3 of your shift workers are vulnerable to this particular type of problem. And people working in mining sectors, healthcare, emergency, seem to have particularly higher rates. Now, working shift work leading to circadian misalignment then leads to a range of sleep disturbances, internal body desynchronization, melatonin suppression, which has an effect on shift work sleep disorder and sleep disorders in general, which can even affect things like mood states. But all of these inevitably lead to health issues. Sorry, it went too far. So this is a graphic abstract of a meta-analysis, of an umbrella review, which is a systematic review of systematic reviews, summarising the health consequences of shift work, where the effects are on obesity, weight gain, type 2 diabetes, the risk, the increased risk if you're a shift worker versus not being a shift worker, are very large in lots of these instances. So shift work has poor health outcomes. Additionally, you have cognitive effects while you're on your shift. So as you progress through your shift, this line over here is representing a comparison of work on a shift of someone working on a night shift versus a day. And you can see how the sleepiness increases progressively across the shift when people are working at night. And this corresponds or parallels the cognitive mistakes people make across their shift. And the cognitive mistakes range from things such as lapses of attention, working memory, planning, problem solving, mental flexibility. I haven't got the time to go through them all, but it's extensive. But to give you an example, in terms of response times and reaction times, you can see, I don't know if I can quite use this pointer, but you can see from the graphs here, for reaction times, the graphs on the left, graph B and graph D, you can see that the top line is the day shift, and then you can see, oh, thank you, whoever's pointing to that. You can see that on the night shifts, the progressive decay in people's performance. And that's also reflected in graph F and H over at the end, which we can see is the frequency of errors or lapses. And this is in just simple attentional response timing, but these types of progressions are seen in other types of cognitive performance as well. And that's pretty intuitive. You can probably feel that yourself if you've ever worked at night, or even if you've ever worked for a long period on a task. As time goes on, your attention wanes, your ability to stay on task diminishes. But what is surprising from the research that's now been coming out is that the type of cognitive impairments that we see when people are working at night doesn't seem to be just restricted to when they're working at night. There's been studies now looking at cross-sectional analysis, comparing people that have worked on shifts versus people that haven't. And this is a very interesting large cross-sectional analysis here,
where they looked at cognitive functioning across a array of different tasks. And what they found was that mere exposure to night shift, so whether you'd worked a night shift before or it was your current occupation, was associated with overall cognitive impairment. And this was testing during normal conditions, so not nighttime conditions, not sleep-deprived conditions. This is just under normal conditions, where people were supposedly well rested at the time. So what this is starting to suggest is the cognitive decrements that happen in shift work aren't just restricted to during the shift. It has implications for your overall cognitive performance. Even in shift workers that have retired, they no longer work their shifts. There is now growing evidence to suggest that attention and executive functioning, as you can see from the graphs at the end here, comparing night shift workers to day workers that are both retired, no longer working, is significantly different. Also, you heard esteemed Professor Abraham talk about Alzheimer's related to and dementia related to sleep deprivation. And you heard the work by Steve related to the hippocampus. Shift work is now being identified as a risk factor for dementia. So there are now been 2 meta-analyses looking at risk ratios related to people who have engaged in shift work related to their dementia risk. And both of these have showed very consistent results with each other, suggesting that shift work shows an increase in risk for the potential of having dementia. So as I said earlier, shift work is essential for what we do in this 24-hour society. So we can't stop people from doing shift work. But what we can do is try our best to maintain good standards of managing shift work risk. And that can be done by looking at the ways to minimise the effects of shift works on our workers, by engaging in what is considered the best procedures for engaging in shift work. So things such as forward rotation of shifts, fast rotation speeds, so there's only 2 to 3 consecutive nights per rotation, having good recovery time for people when they come off shifts, and not making shift durations too long, with recommendations being, say, a 10-hour maximum. Ensuring adequate rest and recovery, and even chronotype considerations. So some people are more evening types and some people are more morning types. So maybe matching better people that are evening types to late night shift work or nighttime shift work. And complementing that by looking at multimodal approaches. And what I mean by that is providing ways of supporting shift workers by giving them education and access to facilities, such as giving them education about light exposure and how they can use that to help manage their fatigue and sleepiness when they're engaged in rotating shifts. Giving them access to things such as CBTI and sleep hygiene training. And giving more education in terms of understanding the effects of caffeine and the benefits of napping and the disadvantages of napping at the wrong time. And embedding that into organisations. So workers that are working on shifts have support to help maintain their health. So I'm keeping this talk very short and concise because I want to put forward some very simple messages. Number one, shift work is related to sleep problems to the extent that we now have a sleep disorder which we call shift work sleep disorder. Shift work has poor health and cognitive outcomes, but they're not just related to when you're working in a shift. They persist beyond the working years. Health implications in terms of cancer risks, dementia mortality risks, and now newer evidence suggesting increased cognitive decline and even increased risk of dementia in the later years after engaging in shift work. But shift work is essential. We have to do it. But I think this growing pool of evidence supports the notion that we need to invest more support into our shift workers in providing best practice for shift schedules, evidence-based fatigue management policies, and education programs for workers and supervisors so that we can better manage these things, and environmental modifications to support circadian alignment. And those things can be very simple as the lighting that's provided to people while they're working in a shift. And there are now lots of shift management types of programs. I've just thrown a screenshot of one example to support the implementation of shift work and also providing support to shift workers. Because I think we need to think carefully in terms of duty of care for our workforce that is 20% of our workforce, and think carefully about their long-term health and not just physical health but cognitive health. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that valuable information. Any questions, please?
Why do I sometimes feel more energetic after sleeping only 2 hours and going to university compared to when I sleep for 7 hours straight?
Very good question. Basically, your sleep isn't a unitary state. You go through different sleep stages. And in Australia, for people that are having fatigue when they drive, we have a policy or a government initiative to encourage drivers to pull over and have what we call a power nap, which is a very short nap. And it's very specific. They say a 15-minute power nap. The reason is that when you go into your sleep stages, if you're only sleeping for a shorter period of time, you have less time to progress to the deep stages of sleep. That has implications for when you wake up. So if you wake up out of light stages of sleep, such as stage 1 and stage 2, you will get some benefits of being refreshed from that short nap, but you won't suffer from something called sleep inertia. Sleep inertia is something that occurs when you wake up out of deep sleep. I don't know if you've ever had a deep sleep and felt a bit groggy afterwards or a bit disoriented. That is often related to longer periods of sleep. So if you wake up out of slow wave sleep, you could actually be more impaired on the road than you were before you pulled up. So what's encouraged is very short naps so you don't suffer from sleep inertia, which might happen from a very long nap or an extended period of sleep. So I'm not too sure if that answered your question, but sometimes when you sleep for longer periods, you wake up out of deep sleep, and that what can give you that lack of refresh type of feeling. Whereas if you have a short sleep or a short nap, you don't go into those deep stages of sleep, so you don't have that large mismatch in brain state between a deep stage of sleep and being awake. Another question?
Thank you so much for this valuable information. I have a question. Is these consequences, it's about because the person did not sleep much or didn't sleep well, or because he didn't sleep at night? If he take like example all these protective measures and he slept well during the day, but and go to his shift work during the night. So is these consequences just because of the person did not sleep during the usual sleep time, which we mean about sleep in the night, or because the sleep time it's not did you get my question?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very good question. So there are two things at play across a 24-hour period. There is a circadian drive, where that's our internal body clock, and we work more optimal during the day because that's when our circadian is at the peak. We work less optimal when we are in our trough of our circadian rhythm. But at the same time, working in conjunction with that is what we call sleep pressure. So if you haven't slept adequately when you were, say, off shift, that sleep pressure will also add to that circadian regulation of your cognitive ability. So when these studies are done, they're done in groups of individuals, some of which may sleep better during the day and have less sleep pressure affecting their cognitive performance. But there will be some that didn't sleep well. So they'll have both effect. They'll be in a wrong phase of the circadian trough, which will affect their cognitive performance, plus they'll have sleep pressure, which will affect their sleepiness and attention, so they'll perform even worse. So there's two things at play. So even people that manage to practice good sleep practices during the day, and even our best attempts to provide optimal conditions for workers, they will still have that circadian internal clock working against them. So we won't ever be able to completely eliminate, but we can reduce harm reduction. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Sorry?
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Let's move to the final scientific session for today's schedule, titled Sleep Disorders and Transportation Safety. The session will begin with our keynote speaker, Professor Stephen Robinson, professor in the Department of Health and Biomedical Sciences in the College of Science, Engineering and Health at RMIT University, Australia. Professor Robinson will be presenting road vibrations and sleep during car driving. Welcome again, Professor Robinson.
I'm back. I'm a neuroscientist first, but I am also a cognitive psychologist. And this presentation will be very different. It's on a completely different topic to the last one. This time, I'll be talking about work I've done on human behavior, looking at drowsiness in drivers. And the title of my talk is Effects of Whole Body Vibration on Driver Drowsiness. This is a picture, or actually it's a photo, of what used to be the longest stretch of highway in the world that was completely straight. Not a single turn or a bend anywhere. It's in South Australia, it's called the Air Highway. And it runs for 146 kilometres without a bend. This is a photo of the longest highway in the world. It was built after the Air Highway, and it's in Saudi Arabia. It's called Highway 10. I expect some of you have driven on it. It's incredibly long. It's 240 kilometres dead straight, arrow straight. It just goes and goes and goes into the distance. So we've got a lot in common. Australia and Saudi Arabia are both big, dry, flat continents with very long, straight roads. That's a problem, because very strong, long, straight roads are associated with driver fatigue, and we see an unusual category of accidents on these sorts of roads. They're often a single vehicle accident where the driver simply drives off the road. If they drive off on one side, they might hit a tree, or if they drive off on another side, they hit a barrier, like you can see here. And they're incredibly common. And it turns out that the reason we have accidents like this, and sometimes they hit an oncoming car if it's not a divided road, is that we see the drivers getting drowsy. If you're driving on a long straight road, it's boring, firstly. There's little stimulation. But there are other factors that I'll be talking about very shortly that cause the drivers to become drowsy. And as they become drowsy, they have micro naps, they lose attention briefly, and they can drift off out of their lane, and that's where they can have accidents. It turns out that something like 16 to 20% of accidents in Australia have been attributed to driver drowsiness. In the trucking industry, where people are driving routinely long distances, it's double that, up around 40%. Now, there's been a lot of work done on driver drowsiness, including here in Saudi Arabia. I just wanted to put this one up just to illustrate the point. It just came out a few weeks ago. Excellent work. This particular paper, the take-home messages from this were they did a questionnaire of almost 3,000 people, and they asked them about their driving in the previous 6 months. And what they reported was that almost half of them, 42%, reported driving while sleepy. 12% said they had to stop their vehicle due to sleepiness, and a number reported near-miss accidents. There may well have been others that had accidents and they weren't able to do the survey for obvious reasons. So this would be an underrepresentation of reality. So it's a very real and big problem. I'm sure all of you, if you're drivers, all of you who do drive will know that you can have periods where you're fighting to stay awake, but you don't stop your car because you're not so far from home or far from your destination, and you keep pushing on. But that's a very dangerous period of time. Now, there's a lot of factors that contribute to driver drowsiness. We heard Russell talking just briefly about, for example, if you're doing shift work, that disrupts your circadian rhythms and makes you sleepy and prone to accidents. There are environmental factors, such as the surface of the road, psychological factors. You can be depressed or preoccupied by other things, or you can be taking medications for particular illnesses. These all have impacts. I'm not going to talk about any of those because there's too many and we all want to go home today. I will talk about this. This is vehicle vibration, and the reason I'd like to talk about it is because of the work that we have done, but also it hasn't been researched a great deal, and yet there's a potential for intervention to improve the situation. Turns out that when you're driving a car, your body is being subjected to vibrations all the time. Those vibrations are coming up from the road, through the tyres, through the suspension, through the seat and the vehicle chassis, and they're vibrating your body. And that's known as whole body vibration. And it turns out that whole body vibration, believe it or not, has an impact on your alertness. So I'm going to tell you about some work today that we've done in a driving simulator. It's based in a lab, but it simulates driving on a long straight road like you'd see in Highway 10. And we ask a number of questions. Whether particular frequencies of whole body vibration impact driver drowsiness, whether particular amplitudes of vibration are more effective at making you drowsy than others, how long you need to be exposed to that vibration before you get drowsy, and finally, whether the whole body vibration affects you badly enough that you actually start to drift out of lane, and maybe that could be a cause of driver accidents. This is the setup we have. So basically, it looks better than that in real life, but effectively what it is, someone's sitting in a driver's seat with a steering wheel. In front of them, they have a screen that projects a view of a road that they're driving along. The whole apparatus is based on a very heavy metal platform, and underneath that metal platform, there's a huge actuator or a pump that moves the vibration platform up and down at a particular frequency and also a particular amplitude. And we can run it at 5 different frequency ranges, and they're listed over there: 4 to 8 hertz, 8 to 16 hertz, all the way up. And we can induce 3 different amplitudes. They're expressed in meters per second, but it's just a physical measure of the amount of up and down it goes. And we also have a control condition where there's no vibration at all. And that's the thing we compare the performance of all the others to. On the left-hand panel, that's the view you have if you're in our driving simulator. You're driving on the left-hand side of the road on what could be Highway 1 or the air highway. And your job is to stay in the left-hand lane, not drift out to the left or to drift right into the other lane. And that's shown in the right-hand panel there, where it shows you the area you need to be in, the part that's covered by the green arrows. If you move out of that, left or right, you move into what we call the unsafe zone, because that represents the area that could lead to you having a crash in real life. And so we're using time spent in the unsafe zone during an entire 60-minute driving period as our metric for how driving is affected by whole body vibration. Now this is just the results from one person. It looks confusing and messy, but I want to direct your attention to a couple of things. Look for the black line firstly. You can see a zigzag black line. What that is showing is how much time the person's spending out of lane over that 60-minute period. And the 0 point is the first 5 minutes. So we measure their performance in the first 5 minutes, call that 0. If they do better, then they're below that line. If they do worse, they're above that line. And you can see for the control condition, they just zigzag around the baseline. On the other hand, you can see the orange and red lines, they're higher, right? Which is telling us that those particular conditions are causing them to spend more time out of lane. And I've color-coded them according to the frequency of the vibration, and you can see there that the red and the orange are 1 to 4 hertz and 4 to 8 hertz. Some of the other conditions also cause an increased amount of time in the unsafe zone, but not as much. Now, this is one person, and what we did to try to get a better and clearer picture is to measure 15 people for each of the vibration conditions and for each of the amplitude conditions. And then what we did is we pulled the data, but then did a cumulative curve. And what that does, it gives you a really clear separation for the conditions, and you can understand much better what's going on. So here are our cumulative graphs from the 15 people for the different amplitudes. If you look firstly to the very right-hand graph, which is a high amplitude graph, you can see that there's the black line on the bottom, gradually going up, because even in the control condition, people over time do spend more time out of lane because it's a cumulative graph. But you can see that the other conditions were all higher than that, which means that if they were subjected to some vibration, they spent more time out of lane. And the ones that are on the top again are the orange and the red ones. If we then move across to the intermediate amplitude ones, you can see the same pattern, but it's a bit more dramatic separation now for the 1 to 4 hertz and the 4 to 8 hertz conditions. And when we move to the low amplitude, which, by the way, you wouldn't even feel. I should have mentioned this earlier. The vibration amplitudes we're looking at here are not very severe. It's not like you're sitting on a pneumatic drill or something. What you're sitting on, it just feels like being in a car. It's sort of gentle vibration. And we we simulated this according to measurements we have taken in motor vehicles driving on freeways. So this is quite realistic range, and with the low amplitude you don't even feel it. You're not even aware of the vibration. But despite that, you can see that at least for the 4 to 8 hertz condition, which is now in mustard yellow colour, it still caused a greater deviation above the control. When we plot this in other ways, this is now the standard deviation of the time spent in the unsafe zone. You can see quite clearly that the 2 bars that are coloured orange and mustard yellow, or or red and mustard yellow, or red and orange, are higher, showing that they had a greater effect. And when we go down to the bottom curves, it's really just those 2 conditions that stand out, and they stand out very dramatically. Now those 2 conditions there, really they're 2 standard deviations of variance, which is translated in functional terms to people who they swerve into the unsafe zone, and normally people go back into the lane fairly quickly, they correct. But those bottom ones there, they just go into the unsafe zone and stay there. Basically what they're having micro sleeps. And so they're not able to respond. And this is probably the indicator of the people most likely to have an accident in real life. And you can see it's very clearly tied to 2 frequency ranges there. When we look at other measures, and I won't go into this because you don't need to really know it, but I just wanted to show you that when we look at other measures of driving, not just time spent out of lane, we see exactly the same pattern. So it's having a profound effect on driving performance across a range of metrics. This is a summary slide that shows us what we call frequency contours, because we're dealing with engineers here, so we have to do things in terms of contours. But basically you can see that there's a red line that dips down more deeply than the others. What that's showing us is the time before you can first record a significant difference from the control condition. And you can see that the red line shows a response at 30 minutes at a frequency of 4 to 8, and then a difference at 35 minutes at a frequency of 1 to 4 hertz and 8 to 16 hertz. And then as we use lower amplitudes, we see the same shape, but it's not as profound. Now, to translate this into ordinary driving, what this is telling us is if you're subjected to, your body is subjected to vibrations of 2 meters, 0.2 meters squared, sorry, I'll start again, 2.2 meters per second squared, which is a slightly bumpy ride, but fairly normal for a car. And you're subjected to a 4 to 8 hertz frequency. That means 4 to 8 vibrations per second over a 30-minute period. You're going to start performing significantly worse than you would normally. That's a fairly short period of time. You don't have to drive very far along Highway 10 it's going to take you several hours to get from one end of Highway 10 to the other. So this is telling us that quite short distances, if you're subjected to that particular range of frequencies, is already going to affect your ability to drive and stay within your lane. We then went to look at driver drowsiness, and we used a self-report, which is using a scale called the Karolinska sleepiness scale, where people rate their sleepiness on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest when they're basically asleep, and 0 being they're really wired and full of beans and wide awake. We found that before they began their 60-minute driving task, they generally reported about a 5 on that scale. And then afterwards, they all showed an increase. Even in the control condition there, which you can see just to the left here, there's the stripy one closest to me, they showed an increase in drowsiness because it's boring. Just driving, even if you're not being vibrated, you're getting tired from the boringness of the task. But you can see there, particularly in the middle and the right-hand graphs, that the other vibration conditions, at the end of that 60 minutes, people reported feeling more drowsy, and most drowsy in the orange and red conditions, which we've already seen are the ones that also cause people to be out of lane. We also measured, that was subjective self-report, and we know that people might report what they think we want to hear, and that's always a problem in research. So we also used an objective measure, and we had a button put onto the steering wheel, and the drivers were reported to press the button as quickly as they could as soon as that sign appeared on the screen. Press the button, so they pressed the button, and would measure the latency between when the sign on the screen came up and when they pressed the button. And this happened quite frequently, so every 8 to 12 seconds the sign would come up, and then we'd average all the points over a 5-minute period to get an average response time. What we found, again, is that response times became longer when you were subjected to either 1 to 4 hertz or 4 to 8 hertz of vibration. And you can see that both in the cumulative curve at the top. The red and the orange, again, are higher than all of the others, and they're quite a lot higher than the black curves. And you can also see it in the standard deviation measures across the bottom in the bar graphs. What we were really surprised about is when we plotted the increase in reaction time against the amount of time they spent out of lane, we got a really striking correlation. And the middle one, I think my colleagues who have worked with people in the past would find scarcely believable that you get such a strong correlation. Normally in psychophysics measures, if you're getting an R value of around 0.3, you're doing pretty well. But this is up at 0.93. So this is showing us that there's a direct correlation. So when you get such higher relationships like this, it's pretty much a causal relationship. You don't have to say maybe one's correlated with another. This is causal. And so what it's telling us is that we see an increase in mean reaction time, and that increase in mean reaction time is causal for the amount of time spent out of lane. And the third factor, of course, is that both are related to drowsiness. So what do we think is going on here? We've got very specific patterns of vibration causing drowsiness. Why is that? And the short answer is we don't yet know. But our speculation is that, interestingly enough, if we look at the stages of the EEG that relate to going into sleep, those that are related to either being in sleep or drifting into sleep are the theta waves, the 4 to 8 hertz, and the delta waves, which is the 0.5 through to 4 hertz. And those are the two frequencies of whole body vibration that cause the most drowsiness. And so what we think is happening is the whole body has been subjected to that frequency of vibration. It's sending synchronized somatosensory information up the spinal cord, and that's starting to put our brainwaves into synchrony in these early stages of sleep. So it's a physical relationship between the whole body being vibrated and then literally putting your body into sleep. And since we've talked about this to various people, they've often offered anecdotes that, yeah, we have kids that can't sleep. And the way we get our kids to sleep is we put them in the car and we drive around the block for quite a while, or drive on Highway 10 or whatever it might be, and it puts the kids to sleep. And we think the same thing's occurring there. That's the same principle. So to summarize then, I put up a number of questions that we sought to ask and answer. So yes, some frequencies are more effective than others at inducing drowsiness, and we've seen those in the range of 1 to 8 hertz are very effective. Amplitude is an important factor. The higher amplitude, which is still within the normal range for a car, it has the biggest effect, while the least vibration that we looked at, which is barely perceptible, has an effect, but it's very small. How quick is the onset of drowsiness? Well, we saw that even after 30 minutes, we got a significant effect at a 4 to 8 hertz range at 0.2 meters per second squared amplitude. And does whole body vibration affect the driver's ability to stay within the lane? Well, yes, it does. And the scary stat here is that when exposed to that optimal vibration range, drivers spend an average of 100 seconds out of lane in that 60-minute period. Now, can you imagine if this was a real-world situation and you were spending that much time drifting out of lane? What's your chances of having an accident? It's extremely high. And that increase of time spent in the unsafe zone is because of slowed reaction times and more frequent attentional lapses and microsleeps. So where we're taking this research into the future? Well, obviously we've found a problem, now we've got to try and solve it. And so we firstly want to understand whether our hypothesis is correct, to see whether whole body vibration does in fact entrain brainwaves the way we think it does. Secondly, we want to look to see whether we can stop that from happening by incorporating devices into the car seat that absorb that specific range of vibrations. And furthermore, we're also looking to see whether we can use higher frequency vibration up above 20 hertz to counteract that effect. Because as you would remember, higher frequency brainwaves are associated with alertness. So perhaps we can, although people are getting sleepy from the lower frequency vibrations, we can increase their alertness by subjecting them also to higher frequency vibrations. So that's where we're taking our work. The people who have done the work are shown here. Dr. Nen Zhang, you can see on the left-hand side, and Dr. Jinwei Xu on the right-hand side did the most. They're both my PhD students, or a couple of the others are too. But they did the majority of the work I've talked about today. And so once again, I thank you so much. I know it's been a long day, and it's really great to see you still in the audience and staying awake.
Thank you very much, Professor Robinson, for that informative lecture. Do you have any questions, please? 1 to 2 questions, please.
Can we speculate that this is what's happening when we are rocking the baby to sleep?
Yes, we could well be doing that. It's a different angle. Normally the rocking is a slightly different motion to up and down. But typically you're rocking a baby at maybe a frequency of 1 hertz or half a hertz, which is definitely in an area or in the brainwaves that we would expect to see an induction of sleep. So it could well be the same thing. Yes.
Thank you for your lecture and your previous lecture, very good. I have a question. Have you ever thought of putting this 1 to 8 hertz in bed mattress to help people with insomnia?
Yes, we have. We have. We've been talking to a number of sleep manufacturers in Australia about that possibility, because it's clearly a logical thing to do for insomnia.
Did it work, or there's no research yet?
We haven't managed to get it into trials yet. Yeah, but we expect it to work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. In conjunction with the valuable information provided, Dr. Yusuf Al-Qurashi, an assistant professor of respiratory and sleep medicine and vice dean of academic affairs in the College of Applied Medical Sciences at Imam Abdul Rahman bin Faisal University, Saudi Arabia, will present a complimentary lecture titled Sleepy Driving, the Silent Epidemic on Our Highways. Please welcome Dr. Al-Qurashi to the stage. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you very much for the organizing committee for inviting me to this conference, and thank you to you who stayed all the way to and up to now to listen to my talk about sleepiness at this period of time, whereas the circadian rhythm is just everything is pushing you to sleepiness. Thank you for Prof. Robinson. I think he's shaped the way to my talk. This talk is very close to my heart. I will tell you why in the next couple of slides. But my talk will be a little bit different than the talk has been presented before me, because this is going to be mainly focused on our context in the Saudi Arabia and Gulf region. So this is what we are going to cover mainly today. We will cover the scope of the issue in our country and how this is related to other countries. And also we will touch base on the mechanism how sleep driving cope. And lastly, we'll provide some tips on how we're going to tackle this problem from different angles. What drove me to this topic and why I said it's close to my heart, because this is stories that we are hearing every once in a while from clinical or healthcare providers. This is one of the stories from, for example, Dr. Aziza Fatani. She has died after a post-call rotations. Another stories as well recently from Sudanese doctor with his wife in their way back home after the shift. They died as well. So, and there are lots of topics you are going to listen about in the social media in our context, complaining of post calls. And this is not only to our context, this is a huge problem, and also it's a global problem that needs to be tackled. So when we look at the motor vehicle accident as general, it's one of the leading causes for death or mortality globally. In our country is one of the fifth most common causes of death in 2019. And this is above the even the global average, even in low-income countries. For example, you see here death rate per 100,000 in Saudi Arabia is 28, compared to around the globe is 17.4. And when we talk only the low-income country, we find it 24, and we are above the average of this rate. And this is statistics from the Ministry of Health showing that the death rate is reaching to up to 5,000, and the injuries reach to 25,000 injuries per year. And we look at the sleep driving itself, is thought to contribute approximately to 20% of all MVA types globally. In Saudi Arabia is 11.6. And it seems that the male genders play a major role for this relationship. So when we look at the studies that have been conducted in Saudi Arabia, we will find mainly 5 large studies. When we look at them chronologically from 2012 to 2024, we find that there are a gradual increase in the sleepy driving and how people feel sleepy during driving. So these are the only studies that I have found is relative. And thank you for Mr. Robinson for giving that our work that have been presented, showing that the sleepy driving also is among male and female is also huge and common. What you can see in the left side of the screen is how this is different categories of sleepy driving are prevalent among male and female. But when we look at the actual accident, because of the sleepiness itself, we did not find major difference and not significant differences between male and female, which means that the sleepy driving itself, the feelings may be different between genders, but when they commit to the accident, they are the same. And this is some of the works that we are currently doing. We look at the prevalence of sleepy driving in the general population compared to different specific population. We find that the truck drivers and healthcare workers, they have the highest prevalence of sleepy driving compared to the general population. So I think Prof. Robinson have touched base on this, but this is just to show you how sleepy driving occur. So there seems to be a relationship, linear relationship between the time we stay awake and the feeling of sleepiness during driving. The longest that we stay awake, the more that we are going to feel sleepy. And you can see it also from the graph on the right side of the screen that the feelings of sleepiness will gradually increase if those people slept less than, started to decrease from 5-6 hours, and it reached to 15% when it reached to 36 hours or 2 hours per night. This is only the relationship, but when you look at also to the behavioral changes from a reaction time test, we find that there will be a increase in the reaction time test once we reach 18 hours awake. And also we have some kind of subjective and objective measure of a sleepiness, and it seems that the subjective measure can predict the objective sleepiness roughly 3 hours, which means that we can, those people who have feeling sleepy, they can prevent it early on, almost by 3 hours before committing to sleepiness. What you can find here is how sleepy drivers feel sleeping during micro sleep, which is a little time that the drivers feeling sleepy, 3 to 4 seconds, the eye will close and all steering input will cease completely. And then there will be a tracking errors increase dramatically as the vehicle shift uncontrolled. And then when the driver awakes after this short period of sleepiness, there seems to be a corrective movement or corrective reactions that often overcorrecting and will increase the crash risk. For example, at 100 kilometers per hour, a 4-second micro sleep, that means you have already drove 111 meters traveled blindly while you are eyes closed. And sharp corrective movement after awakening often lead to overcorrection and lane departures. And I think Prof. Robertson have already described this. So now, what we should do about this problems? What I'm going to talk about in the next slides from different angles. In the clinic, we have multiple rules that we are going to do that will help to tackle this issue. First, we should screen all our patients' driving habits and assess crash risk during every sleep consultation. We have to ask our patients about their sleep. And there are lots of papers talking about those healthcare providers. They should ask their patient about sleep as they ask for vital sciences. Diagnose, treat, and monitor sleep disorder that's affecting driving. We have treatments that tackle the sleep driving very effectively. For example, CPAP treatment reduce crash risk by almost 72%, and CPAP compliance, if those patients are using the CPAP, they will reduce the risk of sleepy driving by almost to reach to the level of the general populations. And also document this. During your visit, you have to document those patients have sleepy driving, and specifically in the sleep report that's generated after a sleep study, if those patients have been reporting sleepy driving, they have to be documented in the sleep report, just for medical legal protection. When we move to research, it's one of the vital rules that we have to do. generate regional evidence on prevalence, risk factor, and treatment outcomes. And I will show you just a table here showing that when we compare our studies, our research conducted in our country, compared to other countries that are leading in this country, we find only 10 studies from 2012 up until now. Some of these studies are small studies, and some of them, they use non-validated tools to assess sleepy driving compared, for example, United States, Australia, and other countries. And also, we have to conduct Gulf-specific prevalence studies of drowsy driving in very high-risk populations. We have to evaluate the treatments, for example, the CPAP treatment, how effective to tackle the sleepy driving. And also, this is a time for use the AI in drowsiness and how these AI can tackle and can detect this issue and to what extent. And also, we have to put this in our context. For example, we have to investigate in Ramadan specific sleep disruption pattern and their impact on traffic safety. So what I find this here is just some of the studies that have been conducted that will tackle the problem from different issues. These are some of the research studies that I suggested. Those people are interested to do some research. This is some of the research gaps they can do. For example, to evaluate CPAP adherence and their impact on crash rates and sleep driver among sleep apnea patients. And also they compared treatment modalities, for example, CPAP versus surgery for oral appliances in driving safety outcomes. Also for studies that validate AI drowsiness detection system in Saudi Gulf environment, because our environment is unique. So we have to test these devices in different situations, like for extreme heat, dust, sandstorm, and so on. And also I think one of the main issues that we do not have longitudinal studies that tracking crash rate before, during, and after Ramadan. Studies in healthcare worker, for example, specifically because this is from previous studies show that those are the most affected populations. And also in policy simulation modelings, and if we implement a plan on some of the population, what are going to be the effect of that policy. And also, from advocacy point of view, we have to partner with Health Ministry and Traffic Department to develop evidence-based drowsy driving regulation. And I think there have been some attempts to solve this issue, but because of the time and very small group tackling this issue. But I think if we collaborate together to tackle this issue, we will reach to a conclusion for this. Advocate for mandatory sleep apnea screening on commercial truck drivings and high-risk occupation. One of the studies that I have presented at the beginning of my talk is in truck drivers, because I think that's only the studies that have been conducted in the truck drivers so far in our country. So I think we need to do more studies in this population. And also testify at legislative hearings and provide expert opinions, lead development of GCC countries-wide recommendations for our countries. One of the papers that we are currently working in is to assess the sleepy driving from around the globe and how different countries tackle this issue from different perspectives. And this is one of the figures that shows that this is the countries with the specific sleep apnea driving laws in the blue, and in the gray, countries with no specific OSA driving laws. And what you can conclude from this figure is that very few countries, they are putting some rules about sleep apneas and when they are have to drive, and if they are comply with the treatment, when they have to drive, when they stop driving, and when the legislative institution they can grant them the license or not. And also this is from our work currently, is that if those countries, they do not have a sleep apnea regulations, do they have some kind of regulations or preventive measure or some suggestions in their websites? We find that there are some countries, they only provide suggestions, they only provide countermeasure suggestion for sleep driving for sleep apnea patients. And the countries in the blue, they have both the countermeasures and the regulations. And also, there are some room for innovations. We have to collaborate with automotive and tech companies to validate drowsiness detection. And I think what Prof. Robinson have mentioned is a very nice studies if have been collaborated with some of the automotive companies. And also we have to ensure that the AI system detect true physiological sleep and just the behavioral proxies, because the feelings is totally different than the physiological parameters of physiological sleepiness. And also we have, finally, if once we reach that point, we can set the clinical threshold for intervention, alert and advice on interventional treatment monitoring platforms. So now what are the take-home messages? I think the problem is huge in our country, and I think still we are lacking behind. We need more studies. We need more solution for this issue. And also, in the clinical practice, we have proven solutions, but we have to document this. We have to treat our patients. We have to make sure that those patients who are, they have been put in treatment, they are using it to prevent more crashes. And also, you as a sleep specialist, or you have some interest in sleep specialists, you have to lead in these different categories for clinical care, research, advocacy, education, and innovations, because if you lead this, you will reach more conclusions, and the evidence that you are going to generate is going to be very effective. And also, finally, we have to transform from silent to vocal, screen every patient for driving risk. We should not keep this as a silent epidemic. We have to speak about it and advocate for treatment for this issue. And finally, let's make drowsy driving as a socially unacceptable. And with this, I conclude my talk, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Qurashi, for those important informations. We welcome any questions or comments from the audience, please.
Thank you for your important lecture. I am as a sleep physician. When I see a patient in my clinic and his Epworth sleepiness scale reaching 12 and 14, when I ask him, have you ever had car accident due to sleepiness? Or I'm very alert on the road. I never did an accident. So how can we tackle this? I usually write in my note that patients should avoid driving while feeling sleepy, and this is the maximum I can do. What else I can provide?
This is a very good question. I think we have to look at it from two different points. Not all patients with sleep apnea, they have symptoms of sleepiness, because this is one important factor. If they do not have a sleepiness, then they are most likely safe from this issue, not safe from the disease itself. And if those patients deny reporting the symptoms, then you just state in your report that if the patients have symptoms of sleepy driving, then they should stop driving. This is just to protect yourself as a healthcare providers. So we have to distinguish between these two, because it's there is a fine line, because in those patients who do not have a sleepiness, and those patients who have the sleepiness itself, but they do not want to report it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the close of this international conference on sleep science, psychological and cognitive impacts launched by the University of Jeddah, I would like to thank you all for your valuable participation. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the second day of the conference. This has been Dr. Ruba Abdurrahman Ashi, wishing you all a wonderful evening. Thank you.